Sorry, I think we got a few more folks that just joined in. Hey, so again, thank you for everyone joining this morning. I've got some announcements here, some housekeeping things to go over. And so as we have today's presentation here today, you guys are going to be muted. So if you have questions for the speakers, as you know, put it in your chat. During our first presentation, there'll probably be a time or two where the speaker will pause and Tina will, aggregate our questions and coordinate our questions and ask the speaker. She'll do that. And as most of you have done, and you guys are doing really great, when you sign in and join the group, you have a recognizable first and last name, and I appreciate everyone for doing that. So as we get started here, I need to do, there's some thanks for a lot of activities that have been recently done by our program here, the Master Gardeners here in Montgomery County. It had a very successful Children's Discovery Day, and that was over the fairgrounds. That's the first time we've done it over in that venue. So Terry Valenti, Pat Mucci, and Dara did a fantastic job. They pulled a lot of things together, large group of folks, and were involved, a lot of Master Gardeners, a lot of new folks from the new class, and I'm real proud of that. That we had a number of folks from the new class join and participate at the Children's Discovery Day. And again, thank you to Terry Valenti, Pat, and Dara for getting that organized. It was a lot to do. They did a great job, and I appreciate that. I think we all do. The next round of thanks goes out to the Fall Festival crew and our leaders there, Mike Welsh and Taffy Turner. I was there in more of a minor role, supporting role, to make sure they got it covered, and they had it covered. A beautiful day. I got a number from the parks that 1,900 people came there. And that is, quite a bit of folks kind of back earlier days, way back in the day, when nice weather on the Fall Festival. Those were kind of close to the numbers we got. So it was an exceptional day. I think the Master Gardeners, I got a fair number of folks to help participate, or we had a large number of Master Gardeners there, but we also had a large number of people come up to the garden. And I know Michael and Taffy were trying to do their best to make sure that folks came and saw our garden that day, and it looks like they did. The other thing I need to do is thank our survey team. And I'm not sure if I get everybody here. Renew, of course, is going to thank Renew, Chris Carter, Blair Zucker, but also some of our recent intern reps, Enoch and Dave Backus and Joel Patton, who helped out, and still, going over some of the feedback from the survey. I'm talking with Renew and others on that. And the other thing I would need to do is thank our tech team here today. We've got Dick and Tina and Chuck here helping out. And if you have questions or conductivity issues, maybe give them a shout. Maybe we can try to help you out. And of course, I need to thank Ryan Haley. She's more in the background today for all her work and coordinating, getting the speakers here and getting everything organized. So got one more announcement to do, I think, on my list. I might have missed something, but I have one announcement. It really gets to me. As many of you know, Stan Gill passed away Sunday. And I'm going to put his link in here where, from the funeral home. And in there, there's a link, there's a tribute wall. So if you guys feel up for it, you might want to check it out. Put your comments. I know not everybody knew Stan. Of course, I knew him very well. And if you get a chance, check that out. And next Wednesday, we're going to have a memorial service over at Semrec. And I'll try to get you the information on that as well. But let me put the link in there here in just a minute for you guys. So he was certainly tight in the industry, and he was very influential. He spoke at every Master Gardener program that I know of. Always did. He made the time, the effort. He adjusted his schedule to always be a speaker at our training program. And he also started a horticulture program at Montgomery College, where I work full time. And a wide variety of other things, but I think this time I'll just put the link in there. And I'm going to hand it over to Renew. Thank you, Renew.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. Thank you. And just to echo all of Steve's quite emotional reaction to the passing of Stanton. As we know, he was so influential in the area that we're all passionate about, which is horticulture. If you had the opportunity to meet or work with Stanton live, you know he's kind of like a force of nature. So he will be missed tremendously. Um, I would like to echo all of Steve's thank yous. We've had such a busy season towards this end of the 2024 volunteer season, and really thank those who have coordinated and volunteered at all of our sort of signature events that we have at this time of year. I know some are still ongoing, so please continue to volunteer if you can. And yeah, really appreciate also Ryan and the tech team and all of the people that are making today's fall conference possible, including our wonderful speakers. I'm sure you'll be in for a treat today with the 3 speakers that we have. I just actually have one announcement today, and I'm making this announcement actually on behalf of Linda. According to the Master Gardener guidelines that we have for our Montgomery County organization, we present the slate to our members every October at the monthly meeting. So we'll be doing that today. And then in November, and we'll be in person next month, which will be exciting, we will do the vote for the slate for 2025. So without further ado, I am very pleased to announce the slate for the 2025 board. Hopefully you can see my screen. So I don't know how to remove the piece at the top of the page, but hopefully you can see the officers and program directors that are here. So starting from the top, our board president for 2025 will be Linda Barrett. First Vice President, Dave Ottolini. Second Vice President, Sue DeGrabber. Continuing on in her role as Secretary will be Carol Kosary. Incoming Treasurer will be Ken Hoyle, and he's partnering up with one of our new interns, Brian Costner. I will continue on as an officer, but in the immediate past president and advisor to the board role. And continuing on will also be our intern class reps, David Backus and Joel Patton. And then moving on to the program directors for gardens, we have Susan Kirby coming into the role. Communications, we have Aman Zohair coming into the role. Anne Hilliard will continue with hands-on education. Beth Myers will continue with info tables and education. And finally, Terry Valenti will be stepping in as program director for major events. So I want to acknowledge all of our current board officers and directors who will be stepping down after their terms at the end of the year, and congratulate all of those who have been nominated for the slate coming in. It's truly been a pleasure serving with the board. And for those who see this list and feel a little inspired, I'm going to pop into the chat a link if you're willing to serve in any kind of capacity, leadership or otherwise. But we have a lot of opportunities in our off season for being in the garden, so to speak, but we have a lot of planning to do and preparing for 2025. So please consider replying to that link with any skills and talents that you might have that you can contribute to our group. So with that being said, I'm going to stop my share and I will be handing back to Steve to introduce our first speaker.
Sounds great. Benjamin Freeton is the director of the Reed Center for the Ecosystem Reintegration. Ben was born and raised in Maryland and spent over 10 years as a speech professional working with government, business, and philanthropic leaders around the world. Over time, Ben became interested in alternative food system development that would support future generations, reduce food insecurity, and help prevent ecosystem collapse. In 2010, Ben began designing and later planted a vertical growing structure to help those living in densely populated food insecure regions of the world. In 2014, Ben joined forested, a 15-acre research-based local forested, 15-acre research-based food forest located in Bowie, Maryland, growing hundreds of species of edible and medicinal plants. In 2018, he was given the unique opportunity to put his practice and his vision on how he would heal the wounded lands. And let me just Ben currently resides with his family on 150 acre land called Morning View Forest that serves as the headquarters for the Reed Center. So at this point, I hope Ben is logged in. I know it's a little bit early, we're 9:30 and we're communicating with Ben he's in Germany right now. And hopefully Ben is there. If not, we might have to pause for a couple minutes because we're a little ahead on our agenda. So,
Steve, he's there if you'll make him a co-host.
All right, let me find him. Oh, gotcha right there, Chuck. Thank you. Ben, you are now a co-host.
Okay, can you hear me? This is Ben.
Yes, I can, Ben.
My video is disabled. It says that it has not been given permission.
Chuck. Chuck, I might need your help on that. I'm not sure why that is.
Yeah, he should be able to now.
Okay. There we go, Ben.
You can see me.
Yes, I can.
Okay, beautiful. So I just have to apologize. I've just gone through a travel nightmare. I am actually sitting on the floor at Frankfurt Airport, and I so appreciate getting the opportunity to talk and share with you. My computer is also now connected, and I was wondering if that could also be made a co-host.
Right.
Is that viable?
I think it could
What
be.
name is it? What name would it be showing, Ben?
It would also be Ben Fritton.
Do you see it, Chuck? I
If-
think I do.
Okay,
Gotcha.
great.
Gotcha.
Thank you so
That's
much.
That's been.
Beautiful, beautiful. Okay. Well, hi everybody. I do apologize. I'm glad that you guys are ahead of schedule. I've never heard of a meeting being such a thing. So I just wanted to start today by kind of starting with a philosophical, call it changing our perception largely of what food forests are, why they are so important. The fact that you guys are focusing on food forests and permaculture today is a pretty extraordinary thing to me. I've been speaking to master gardener groups for a long time, and I see an overt marriage between the intentions of permaculturalists and food foresters such as myself, and the work that you all do. I also I wanted to say that I'm going to try to share my screen on my computer, and I'm not going to be following the script on this, but I want to have it available to people for when we have questions. So one of the first things that I wanted to bring forward is that our ability to perceive into the world as a species has always been limited. And what I mean by that is, you know, so much of what we know about how nature works is actually due to very new technologies. So much of how ecosystems work. And yet there have been people all over the world, indigenous tribal people that we usually talk about in the third person. We speak of it as something in the past, but in fact, it's the very core of who we are as a species. That every single one of you, no matter what you perceive your ethnic, cultural heritage to be, we all came from bands of people that were vested in each other's survival and were required to survive in, among, and from ecosystems. And only recently has our species taken a turn to where the majority of us don't know where our foods come from. And as such, I'd like to do a couple of fun little examples, just so, you know, to speak about our perceptions of ecosystems. So I want all of you to picture your favorite plant. For me, that would be a fig tree. Fig trees are known to support more individual life forms than any other tree on earth. That's of course the tropical fig. The figs that we can grow here in temperate environments, not so much. So I wonder if you've been able to picture your favorite plant, and I wonder what percentage of you actually pictured the roots of that plant. So I've been traveling around the world now for a couple of decades, and I've spoken to in the tens of thousands of people now, and I've only had a few handfuls of people raise their hands at the talks that I give, saying that they actually pictured the roots of their plant, and the majority of those actually the plant that they were picturing was a carrot, potato, beet. So it was actually a food root, hence why it came front of mind. And so with that, there are so many components of how ecosystems work, how soil works, how macro ecosystems work, how interconnected the global climate and weather patterns are. And I'd like to address that a little bit before I get into the nuts and bolts of what it is that you need to do in a food forest to care for it. So I want to start by saying that we have tools now that we've never had before, and I'd like to recommend that everybody take the opportunity to go on to Google Earth time-lapse when they have the space to do it. Google Earth time-lapse is the first look at the multi-generational collateral effects of our collective decision-making. So in this video that you see on the screen, this is Las Vegas, the fastest growing city in the United States. Striking that it's in the middle of a desert. If you wanted, and I'm not doing this here, but you could actually zoom in and see all the golf courses that were built since the year 1984. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to zoom out and I'm going to show all of you Lake Mead. So one of the things that you can do is you can see for the first time objective causal links between human activity and what is happening ecologically in the world on a macro scale. And so you can see the billions of acre feet of water that have been reduced in Lake Mead over that time. So again, that's 1984 and that's 2016. This is an old screen recording that I did. They actually go to, I believe, 2022 now. But sadly, if anybody knows anybody at Google Maps, for some reason they took off the scale. This scale that you see down here at the bottom left, it's cartography 101 to keep a scale on there. And I'll just quickly go through this. This is the Aral Sea, the fourth largest lake in the world that dried up in 2009. And you can actually go down and see and zoom in and see all the cotton production that's being done and the canals that were made that are usurping the water that would have fed the Aral Sea in that time. I like to remind young people when I talk to them about this, that when I was their age, I could have never, first off, of course, seen something like this, but even more so, I wouldn't have been able to ask Google about cotton production in Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and actually see footage, see the fact that there's actual slave labor producing that cotton as well. They have at the touch of their finger the ability to not only see things like this, but to learn in rapid speed. And this is an example of the Amazon being cut down. The dark green turning into the light green is actually dense forest being turned into soy. And that soy then being fed to cow CAFOs and being shipped around the world, including the United States. So the reason why I show these things to you is because when we talk about climate change, and as I call it, global weirding, when we talk about these things, they can feel really enormous, and they are. And we often talk about CO2, and we talk about these invisible greenhouse gases in the atmosphere that are causing so much of the systemic warming that we face. And while that is true, there's a greater reality of what has been happening on the ground around the world that has been actually warming from the surface of the ground. If you were to go on a hot sunny day here in the mid-Atlantic, say 90-degree day, and take a thermometer and have that thermometer on the asphalt in front of your house, you could get temperature readings of up to 130 or more degrees. If you take that same thermometer and go into a wood line of a young, unmanaged forest, even with invasives in it, and you stuck that thermometer underneath of the leaf litter on that same day, and you can get temperatures as low as 65 degrees or less. And the other really dramatic thing that we have had the opportunity to learn is that over time, we as a species have not only deforested so much of the planet, but here in the mid-Atlantic, when you think about managing a garden, you're thinking about mulching and weed control and those kinds of things. But if you let our landscaped land go, even if you let our parking lots go in this region, well, in that region, I'm not there right now, you would actually see within 10 to 15 years a well-established forest that would start growing if we stopped all of our land management practices. One of my dear friends, he would say, I don't know why we call it a lawnmower, because if we stop mowing our lawn, it would become a forest. It's actually a forest mower. And so with that, here in the mid-Atlantic, we are ecologically poised to be a breadbasket. And despite that, in fact, what we have done is we've decided, for the reasons of economic efficiency, largely looking at average annual temperatures, we have decided that we are going to centralize agricultural production. And the Central Valley of California is the most productive region in the history of the world. The Central Valley of California, hopefully you can see my cursor, is right here, and it is rapidly running out of water. The aquifers that used to be able to dig shallow wells dozens of feet below the ground now have areas where they have 3-year waiting periods to get wells that dig down thousands of feet into the ground. Now, that is bad enough that we've been extracting water from those aquifers and from the Colorado River so rapidly. But what's even scarier is that the salt content of the water that we're now drawing up in some areas is 30 times higher than that from the 1950s. Meaning, to get the same irrigative effect, to get the same water uptake from your plants requires more water to irrigate. What's even worse than that is that salt content ends up building up on the surface of the soil. So it's not even that you have water that has, in some cases, extreme cases, 30 times the salinity, but once that water hits the soil, the salinity increases again because it dissolves and becomes part of that water that we're irrigating with. So we talk about the Central Valley of California. We talk about the aridification, the desertification that's extending from Arizona and New Mexico and these places where we're growing very water-hungry crops. We have a system in Colorado to allocate Colorado River water in the state of Colorado, where it is based on the number of acreage, the acreage that you have that determines your water allocation. If you do not use your water allocation, you lose that water allocation, which is the exact opposite incentive that I think any of us on this call would create for a water shortage issue, where we would want to reward the people that actually obtain a yield and do it in the most efficient ways possible. Instead, we have people growing very water hungry crops like alfalfa, because they want to make sure that they can maximize that water usage and retain those water allocations annually. The Colorado River as a whole is the agreement among all the states that use it and Mexico actually has an allocation of more than 1 billion acre feet more than the Colorado River has had any year since, I believe, the 1940s. So we're actually allocating more water in the agreement than the Colorado River actually holds. We are very close to having to shut down power production in Lake Mead. Last I heard, about 50 feet from having to shut it down. Even with the snowpacks in the Colorado and through the Sierras this year, which rebounded water supplies in the Colorado River Basin as well as in the Central Valley of California, it only brought them back to levels from 2021. And so with that, I just want to show a couple what feel like to me perception changing looks at the world. This is from a guy named Robert Zux, a Romanian artist who actually created all of the river basins of the entire world. And with that, it's kind of counter to this idea of the greater connected world, but I'll just zoom in here on the continental US, and you can see how massive the Mississippi River Basin is, Colorado River Basin here. And the reason why I bring these things forward is because despite the fact that we can show, for example, that herbicides such as glyphosate and 2,4-D and these different things that are being utilized at scale in agriculture. The fact that they can do the thing that they promised, that they were able to find in a laboratory, that plants die except for the genetically modified plants that are resistant to them. That scientific modality of being able to prove what something does, and of course, in proving so, having to take out as many variables as possible, right? That is a mandatory in the scientific method in order for you to show true causal links and the cause and effect models. But the problem is that the real world doesn't work that way. There are in an infinite number of variables once you put it out into the ecosystem. And here we are in the corn belt of the United States, spraying so much herbicide and now stacking multiple herbicides to try to achieve that technological goal. And now all of that centralizes in this river basin and comes out into the Gulf of Mexico, creating one of the largest dead zones in the world. And so we're running out of space on the planet to be able to produce agriculture. Right now, these are broadly the different biomes of the world. I combine them just to make it easier to understand. And of course, the most arable land exists in grassland and savanna and tropical and temperate forests. And we've now put agriculture across the vast majority of those lands around the world. And the last thing that I'll say about this is that we're also now, as I was describing, encroaching on the desert. Alfalfa being grown on these pivot farms throughout the desert. And then, of course, in California, growing things like almonds, which require 1 gallon of water per almond. So I just wanted to say that we have really lost sight of how important soil is. And I'm sure a lot of people on this call have really started to dive in to both soil quality as well as soil microbiology, which is extraordinarily important. But with the kinds of erosion that we're seeing around the world now, because we're stacking the compaction of machinery that compacts just below where we plow, it's called the plow pan, with the herbicides that also are now accelerating the death of soil microbiology. We now not only are having the water erosion that you see here, but wind erosion is coming back at scales much larger than what we would have called the dust bowls of the late 1920s into the 1930s. And for example, this one here is in Phoenix, Arizona, and it's over a mile high. And it's not just carrying topsoil, it's also carrying all of the agricultural additives that we are currently utilizing. So that's, of course, fertilizers and pesticides. And when we look at those same lands in the Midwest of this country, what root systems would have looked like, we're talking root systems that could penetrate, in some cases, 45 feet or further down. And this does a lot of things. One is, and I hope you're able to hear me over the announcements behind me. I do apologize for being in an airport, but I'll cover my ears here. So when you look at the root systems of the annual cropping systems that we rely upon now as a species, the annual plants tend to have much shallower root systems. There are some very few examples of that. Hemp, for example, can have erratically deep root system in a singular year, which is pretty extraordinary. But most of the annual plants that we rely upon do not have very deep root systems. Now, imagine whether it was deep-rooted savanna or forest systems, as it was east of the Mississippi, how much more resilient those systems were to things like drought, how much more resistant those systems were to fires. That when you have root systems that penetrate even 15, 20, and 30 feet into the ground, those root systems are also creating a path of least resistance for water to get deeper into that soil. And so the plants themselves are creating the resilience that same system will rely upon. So with that, I thought I would take a little break before we dive in on what we can do about it and what we can learn from the systems that we've been utilizing over the last 10,000 or more years that can guide us forward into a healthier and in some cases self-sustaining and self-perpetuating agricultural systems. Is there going to be somebody moderating questions?
Yes, Ben, I'm moderating questions. And
Hi, Tina.
hi. And just a couple technical questions first.
Yes.
There isn't an easy way for you to move to a presentation view, is there? Because with the preview
Oh,
view,
the screen is really small. Okay.
it's smaller.
I can
but-
absolutely do that.
Okay.
I can easily do that. I won't be able to dive around as quickly, but that's okay. All right, slideshow and from current slide. Okay.
Okay.
Is that better?
Yes, a little bit better. Although we're still seeing all the preview. Ah, there we go. Just a little bit of a delay, I'm guessing, from our distance.
Okay, got you.
Yeah, that's much better in terms of the detail. And now I'm
Okay, beautiful.
call out to the participants who are all muted to run their questions into the chat and see if I can come up with a little bit. So far, I think they are bringing them in. I had a quick question. When you talked
Yes.
Mid-Atlantic, can you
Yes.
expand that a little bit more about the strengths that region has, our region?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So that the region as a whole was forested or swamped and pre-colonization. That being said, and I was going to save this till later, but this was actually, most of the forests were managed forests by the indigenous populations here. And it's a little bit interesting in that what we've spoken of as indigenous agriculture on the eastern seaboard, mid-Atlantic, was Three Sisters gardening. And there was a little bit of what I would call European bias in that they didn't recognize that the forest systems that they were harvesting the bulk of their food from would have been cultivated. That when we refer anthropologically as to indigenous peoples as hunter-gatherers, we kind of get something in our head akin to what it's like when we would go foraging, if we're to walk through the woods and happen upon food, when in fact that idea is I'll say this very frankly, it's a dehumanizing idea, because the idea that people would go underneath of a nut tree, for example, and they would find these nuts and bring these nuts back to the village, and the nuts that they did not harvest that were laying on the ground, that those would sprout into other trees, and that they wouldn't notice that, and that they wouldn't utilize that technology. Even nomadic peoples were spreading plants wherever they went. It only makes sense for ancient peoples to have spread abundance wherever it is that they walked. the systems that they created were akin to what you and I think of as life insurance policies. The way that you impact future generations is by creating more and more abundance, generation over generation over generation. And most indigenous populations around the world have actually lived that way. I just thought that that's an important note for the Mid-Atlantic region. That was true here too. It might have been the Appalachian forest, might have been the largest contiguous food forest in the entire world. 1 out of every 4 trees in most of Appalachia, or at least a good portion of Appalachia, would have been chestnut trees, and not the natural spread of chestnut trees. The raw capability when we beat land down, literally, I've been on land and rehabilitated land that had a 300-year history of tobacco, one of the most nutrient stripping plants you could possibly grow. And yet the ability for that space to rebound is extraordinary. Even though we're getting heavier rainfalls and less consistent rainfalls, so it's longer drought periods and heavier rainfalls when they do come, we still have enviable rainfalls around the world. But the struggle is that agriculture is an extremely difficult thing to have in a supply and demand model. When you live in a place where cost of living is getting as high as it is for us in our region, it makes it next to impossible for us to survive in agriculture. We've had amazing CSAs and diversified farms fail right in our valley because cost of living is so high, and we can't compete with the agricultural systems that don't take into account I was going to say long-term collateral effects. Really, the short-term collateral effects of growing as much as we're growing in these desert regions. And as long as they're not paying for those long-term effects, there's no way in which agriculture, where it's ecologically viable, can actually persist. So we have the ecological viability without the economic viability. And that's the bridge that we have to divide.
Okay. I have.
That's the divide we have to bridge. I mean.
Yes. I have a couple other questions coming in. One
Yes.
wasn't there a lot of savanna in the Mid-Atlantic area, serpentine barrens being one of the examples?
Yes, absolutely. Most of what I know of as savanna land, again, savanna is still going to have some treed areas, but savanna tends to have something that sets back what we call biological succession. For those of you that are not familiar with biological succession, think of volcanic eruption at one end of the spectrum and old growth forest at the other end of the spectrum. Old growth forest being able to support more life per cubic centimeter than any other terrestrial ecosystem. And a volcanic eruption can turn an area to glass, where you have your first hints of bacteria growing on it, and then lichen, and then it slowly can build. But there's all kinds of things that set back biological succession, whether that's floods, as is common in some savannas, and fires, or an aridification. So only macro nuts can and fire resistant species of trees can grow. So yes, in fact, the indigenous populations burned massive amounts of understories of forest to create savannas as well, all through this region.
Okay. And the final question, different folks have had different levels of success with the Three Sisters gardeners. One person said beans never thrive on the corn plants. Squash doesn't thrive in the shade of corn. So any general thoughts on how to successfully combine multiple plants in a garden rather than fields of single species?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. I mean, there's a few things that I think are worth mentioning. One, the Three Sisters gardens would have been spread out, so the corn would not be planted very densely. Second, the species of beans that were selected by indigenous tribes and the corn that was selected by indigenous tribes would have been bred together over time. Taking any bean and any corn is not going to work. Lastly, and this is the most important part of this whole equation, the landscape that they were successfully growing Three Sisters on is not the landscape we find today. They were not dealing with what I think many people call invasive species, what I call maladapted species, that let's just say can absolutely take over, dominate, and usurp energy from a Three Sisters garden. That being said, I think I'll actually dive in on polycultures and the best advice I can give on polycultures as I go forward in the presentation. And I have photographs of some of my favorite polycultures, if that works for you.
Okay,
Okay, so should I continue?
sure, go for it.
Okay. So a few other kind of macro concepts that I wanted to bring to all of you. One is that I talked about Google Earth time lapse, but the hydrologic cycle and the biotic pump is one of the missing things that I think everybody involved in horticulture, biology, ecology, that we need to be talking about. That the transpiration, specifically from treed systems and the low pressure systems that those treed systems create, have been vastly overlooked in what has caused the aridification of the world. So if you go to South Mountain that I live on, just west of Frederick, Maryland, South Mountain will actually, it's a treed high point. And that treed high point creates a low pressure system and will actually, even in drought, hold on to clouds in the night. And those clouds, even if we're not getting precipitation, will actually leave a massive quantity of dew on the ground to keep the hydrologic system down in the valleys below going. Places that we think of as desert now, such as the Fertile Crescent, the Levant, and the mountains through that region were all vast growing forests. And once those forests, especially in the highlands, were depleted, the moist systems, the dew and fog that would come off of the Mediterranean, off of the Indian Ocean, off of the Red Sea, those evaporations would actually go in the nighttime, and they would hang at the top of these forested mountains. And this is what gave life to the valley people below. And the reason why I bring that forward is because if there is a singular ecological shift that you would like to be part of, it is reforesting, starting within 200 miles of coasts, reforesting highlands. Now, when we talk about photosynthesis and the carbon dioxide that's released in photosynthesis, we often, the oxygen released in photosynthesis, we now understand better what happens to the carbon that is taken in from these plants. 20% of the carbon from woody species are used to grow more woody biomass. The other 80% go down to the root systems, half of which are used to make new root biomass, and the other half is expelled as exudates. These exudates support a massive amount of soil microbiology around the root systems. That soil microbiology create the structure in the soil that allow for those root systems to be able to go deeper into the soil, for those root systems to be able to hold water, for those root systems to be able to have resilience in times of flood and drought. Now, then we think of the water that is actually used by the plants. That water vapor that is released during photosynthesis, that transpiration results in the majority of rain that hits land on Earth. That is a very new understanding. Only in the last decade have we really been able to model this. And even newer still, the NOAA High Split, HYSPLIT, NOAA High Split actually is an open source tool that allows you to look at a weather system that comes anywhere on Earth. You just type in the coordinates and you say where clouds were, say between 5,000 and 10,000 feet, and it will give you a readout that those clouds took to get to you. For the first time in human history, we can actually see where our weather systems come from. So, for example, the transpiration that occurs in rainforests, 80% of the rainfall in a rainforest came out of the plants in that same rainforest. In fact, the forested systems of the Central Appalachia region would have been rainforest. And those systems are much more predictable rains. The rains stay lower in the atmosphere. They're much gentler rains than evaporative storm systems that go much higher into the atmosphere and cause much more torrential downpours. And now, of course, with the warming global temperatures that we have, the atmosphere is able to hold much more water. And that is what is causing the extremes that we're seeing from evaporative rainfalls. I'll take it one step further, which is to say that these storm systems that come across the Atlantic, they get intensified because they are bouncing off of West Africa. The high pressure system created by the deserts of North Africa actually are what create the first spirals of our what become tropical depressions, storms, and hurricanes. And the whole of North Africa used to be forested. They said a squirrel could run from Egypt to Morocco without touching the ground. And now the high pressure systems that we've created have totally changed the hydrology and the ability for moisture to be able to work its way inland. Now we create technology like fog screens that they're putting in the highlands along North Africa to try to capture the Mediterranean fogs and dew to actually create water for the surrounding areas when there are trees that are designed to do exactly that. Okay, so that's the last I'll say about the macro. And then I'll kind of dive in on some more things that we've learned. The trichromes that exist on plants, now that we have the ability to actually do genetic modeling and understand what is the diversity of microbes that exist not only in the soil but on the surface of plants, they're finding that there are nitrogen fixing bacteria that actually live on these hairs, on these trichromes, wherever they find them in nature. It turns out that nitrogen fixation in nature is far more prevalent than we ever thought before. Haber-Bosch, the Haber-Bosch system, Haber was that we now use, of course, for warfare and bomb creation, but also creating what we call synthetic nitrogen from the air. They were looking at what nitrogen exists in the soils and saying nitrogen is being depleted around the world, and we are now in need of creating as much nitrogen as possible to actually go down into the soils so that we can actually feed the food plants that we rely upon. And that's half right. I likely wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that Haber-Bosch system. But there's a couple missing links that they didn't have. Number one, not all of the nitrogen that an ecosystem utilizes for the year is plant available nitrogen right now. So what you see in fertilization of agricultural systems is usually at the beginning of the year, putting about 120% of the nitrogen needs of that system in, knowing that they're going to have losses from rains and things like that. And of course, nitrous oxide, which is so much worse than both methane and carbon dioxide for our atmosphere. And most of that coming from the off-gassing of fertilization in agriculture. And whoops, sorry, I'll go back to presenter view here. And all of that to say that we knew of the pea family, bean family, and its ability to fix nitrogen. But what we didn't know, and it was intuitive to me, for years I was saying, why is it that black locust is the fastest growing tree in our ecosystem? Well, okay, it can grow in very poor soil because it has this nitrogen fixing capability in its partnership with rhizobia bacteria in its root system that can pull the atmospheric nitrogen, create plant available nitrogen to feed to that plant. But why is tulip poplar and sycamore able to grow almost as rapidly as black locust in as porous soil? And in 2021, they found a fungus that was fixing nitrogen on the surface of the leaves of the tulip poplar. And then in 2023, they said, oh, it's actually not the fungus that's making the transition from nitrogen in the atmosphere to plant available nitrogen. There's a bacteria that lives on the fungus, and the fungus is the one that's able to transfer it into the leaves. So again, all new technology that is allowing us to see what many people were intuitively able to see. The mycorrhizal networks and the work of Susan Simard and using radioactive carbon to track where the exudates that are expelled by plants get shared through ecosystems is nothing short of extraordinary. The ability for roots to partner with these mycorrhizal fungi and those fungi to somehow, and we do not know how this happens, know what that plant needs at that given part of its life cycle. That you can imagine at different times in the life cycle of a plant, it's going to need more of different resources. It might need more protein when it's creating its seed and more calcium when it's creating the shell. And somehow the mycorrhizal fungi seem to know what it is that the plant needs and can bring it from anywhere in its massive web system in the forest floor. Every time we plow, we're ripping up these systems. We didn't know that these systems existed, and when we started ripping them up, we didn't understand when you're spraying a fungicide to target a pathogenic fungus on a given plant that you could be killing 12,000 species of other fungi that might be living in that soil that are the very basis not only of the immune system of that plant, but of that plant's ability to uptake the valuable resources around it so that they don't have to be fed. Why is it that a forest can grow in perpetuity without the need of us fertilizing it, without the need of irrigation, and without the need of herbicides? All of it has to do with the ability of that system to recycle every living thing that eats, urinates, defecates, and dies in that ecosystem, becomes part of that ecosystem's ability to support even more biomass than it did before. That's how biological succession is able to grow to where you could have redwood trees that just the tree itself, not any of the creatures living on it, just the tree itself equals on a scale with humans, 13,000 human beings. That is because of an extraordinary network of life that is able to break down the sand, silt, and clay, all these particles that exist as parent material in all soils, these microbes that exist in the soil can actually break down those component parts and feed it to the plant life in perpetuity, the phosphorus, all of these things that we're now mining and extracting and running low on and creating pollution problems when we're using them in agriculture. Soil food web, I'm not going to get into it. It's a big topic, but I wanted to just say that what we need in a globalized food system that now has us as a species very vulnerable to food shortages. Most cities in the world have less than 1 day food supply in the entire city should food supplies be cut off. And we had a program in the US that was a Homeland Security initiative before we ever had the term. And that was the Victory Garden campaign. Decentralized food systems to ensure that we had food systems that would be resilient in time of geopolitical conflict and the potential of oil reserves shutting off shipping routes. The USDA said that these programs were so successful that that half of the food consumed in the United States by the late 40s came out of Victory Gardens. These are some vertical gardens that I built. I'm not going to go into that because it's a forest garden talk, but I designed and patented these so I could utilize them in refugee camps and in densely populated areas around the world. Growing walls, same thing. How do you grow on top of soil that's contaminated, on top of soil, on top of asphalt? How do you grow in such a way that people that have physical limitations can actually grow food? This is my 96-year-old grandmother-in-law who was able to grow food for the first time since she was in her 70s in China. She was 96 here. Using straw and other retaining mediums, I prefer straw to retain compost that we fill our vertical gardens with, and then you punch holes in the side and grow from the entire surface area. Agricultural densification, especially in urban environments. And I'm an all hands on deck person. I'm an all tactics on deck person. This idea of vertical gardening in skyscrapers, fantastic, great. I don't believe it's as healthy a food as when you're growing in diversified, healthy soil. And the billions of dollars of infrastructure that it will take to actually feed people, to actually create those systems means that there will have to be a return on investment. And I'm going to leave this here as a nugget and we'll get a little breath around it so you can take this in. It will never be profitable to grow food for people that have no money. This literally shapes the entire global food system allocation. This is why here in the Mid-Atlantic, we get allocated food from all over the world where there's food security in some of the places that we are getting that food from. So again, I'm just going to take a breath here. That literally shapes the entire global food allocation. And if that's the case, if we're only going to be putting in systems that require return on investment, then agriculture is really going to struggle. We're never going to be able to put in that infrastructure that we have to have in to create soft landings for when catastrophe strikes, for when there's oil shortages, when the few ports where the vast majority of our foods come in through from around the world, when there's disruptions there. The fragility of our food system cannot be overstated. And this is why I recommend food forestry as the objective here. This was developed, this is a picture by Lincoln Smith, another person who I hope all of you get to meet from Forested. He and I worked together to start a forest garden in Bowie, Maryland. And again, looking at monocultures, you're utilizing horizontally across space. Corn is about 18-inch cobs growing at about 3.5 feet off the ground. Apples, it's usually dwarf apples that'll grow up to maybe 8.5 to 11 feet tall. In a truly diversified food forest, we can have food that grows up to 120, 160 feet tall. And we're not only utilizing the sun, and creating these stair-stepping models, but we can also utilize the shade to grow things like mushrooms and having animals living in the understory, medicinal herbs and edible understory crops as well. We can really maximize our food production, and when I mean maximize food production, it doesn't have economic efficiency of, you know, having as few people as possible and as little acreage as possible, growing as much of one thing as possible. But it does allow for us to grow a food system that in our communities produces food through the entire year. All kinds of diversified crops. Here are some examples of polycultures that grow themselves. I'm not going to get too much into some of these because I think some of you are asking about annual cropping systems, which I will also talk about. These are perennial systems. The one on the left is one that I found in the wild. It's about 100 vertical feet of of different edible and medicinal plants, all in one little picture right here. And for those of you that don't know what pine is good for, the needles are a fantastic high vitamin C tea. And these systems grow in perpetuity. Now, you will have to set back succession if you want to create tiers that go into the sun. And I'll show some examples of that. Now, what you see here on the right is something that I wanted to mention. One of the things that is most important about growing your foods ecologically is that you know where those foods originated in the ecosystem. So with melons and with squash, look at how they look at the structure in which they grow. They are made to grow and compete in early successional grasslands and forests, shrublands. So up to when you start getting small trees, they have the ability to climb up and over things. What they do is they have these big fruit, and those fruit create a void where those seeds can actually germinate in. And then they will be able to grow in that all the nutrition that then breaks down from that gourd or from that squash. And then it grows up and can climb over all of the other grasses. Currently, the way we grow pumpkins, the way we grow our squashes, is we plow an entire field and grow them as a monoculture. I'm able to get as much productivity from a polycultural system where I let wildflowers grow and I plant my young fruit trees and I let the squash do what the squash does. And with that, what I do is, I don't know if any of you guys have had a compost pile where squash grows out of it, but they love unfinished compost. Imagine what a rotting squash looks like. They're used to growing out of not fully rotten squash to then germinate, and then they put their roots down into the ground and then grow up over things. So what I do is I take my unfinished compost and I make a small pile in my early successional lands, and I let my squash just do what the squash does. And I've had so much success doing it that way. Annual cropping systems, always think what do plants grow together naturally. In this bed right here, we have amaranth, behind it, Egyptian walking onions, which is a perennial onion. Strawberries, love growing with onions. In nature, grow strawberries and onions together. If you can get perennial onions, all the better. Wood sorrel naturally grows right along with them. Wood sorrel is edible in your salads. Sour green. White clover, which you can also eat the blossoms of, don't have as much flavor, but are fixing nitrogen into the system. And that bed of the strawberries, wood sorrel, and white clover create a living mulch that I can then grow my Brassicaceae into. So you can grow your kales, and you can grow your other and you're not limited to Brassicaceae. They just seem to do best in my gardens where I have white clover, wood sorrel, strawberry, and onions. So again, having a perennial framework and then putting annual plants intermixed into that. Looking at what plants like. This is amaranth, and the amaranth started out as a seed, and then it grew up into these 8-foot tall giant plants. And then I grew underneath of that rainbow chard. Rainbow chard needs full sun in the spring, and it has full sun until when summer hits, when these amaranth get big enough to shade the rainbow chard, and I get rainbow chard through the entire summer because of that shade. And then I cut down the amaranth in the fall, right when the chard needs full sun again. It's really easy to integrate children into your gardens as well. I don't know why I'm trying to move forward in my, and then I'll go ahead and take questions again here in a moment. But I just want to say that forest gardens, they can be done at any scale. I described the stair-step model where you have trees that grow to the north, like such as here, if you can see my cursor. I have trees here to the north that grow to 100 feet tall, such as oaks that we use for acorn flower. And then I stair-step down to, this is an all native food forest, by the way, stair-step down to native persimmons that can grow to 65 feet tall, down to service berries and pawpaws. And then this is a swale that catches the runoff that comes down here. And allows that water to seep in for the lower gardens. Then I put in my shrub layer here, and then I put in my nitrogen fixing black locust grove here, and then that gives me 40 feet before I start my next canopy layer that goes here. And then I stair step down, stair step down, stair step down again. And so that's me being able to maximize, as that system grows in, I'm able to maximize the amount of photosynthetic intake and the amount of plant biomass. And I'm able to grow in that stair stack system where this canopy layer will have leaves that grow all the way over into here. And yet these lower plants will actually be able to receive sunlight. If you're doing a backyard garden or a front yard forest garden, and I know Mike Judd's going to be on this, his perennial edible landscaping with a permaculture twist is such a fantastic book to show very achievable ways to do this in a backyard. But I'll just say that think about the spacing of your plants. You don't have to start with 120 feet. If you have a northern corner to your backyard, I don't recommend putting in 100-foot tall trees. I just don't. People are talking about needing forest cover again in neighborhoods. The next people that buy your house are going to cut it down. Insurance companies are now sending up drones to see how much tree cover you have and are going to be giving insurance rates based on the amount of canopy trees that you have over your house. Plant diverse, smaller trees in your system. Biodiversity is what creates the refugee camps. I know refugee camps for wildlife, that is. And it also allows you to diversify your backyard garden and actually start producing food from that space. I know that growing a garden that helps wildlife is a goal of a lot of you, but just know that our diets are the primary way that we touch this planet. The majority of land that you and I are interfacing with on a year-by-year basis is actually the land that we don't get to see that our food comes from. So if you can create food in a diversified garden that also supports wildlife and allows for you to have healthier food that's produced right in your backyard, then you're going to get food that was harvested from 1,000 miles away when it was harvested pre-ripe, so it could ship across 1,000+ miles without getting bruised. Your backyard is the key to you eating much more bionutrient dense food. Support your local farms, support local agriculture, even if it costs more, because the bionutrient density of a hyper local picked tomato can be 800 or more fold that which you're getting from the supermarket that was harvested from 1,000 miles away or more. So I'll go ahead and leave it there, and just I would love to take some questions.
Okay.
And this is the Reed Center, some imagery from the Reed Center. These shots that I'm showing you here of different food forest models that we have across the site while I'm answering.
So I have a good number of questions.
Yes.
The first is just in a practical sense, what is the optimal way to harvest root crops that is least damaging to the micro, I'm not pronouncing it correctly, microchial network?
Yeah.
Ready to harvest 3 beds of sweet potatoes at Durwood, and we're curious how to do it.
Yeah. There's an amazing documentary called Spaceship Earth about the biodome experiment, I believe it was in California. And every time that they would harvest sweet potato, the CO2 in the biodome would skyrocket. The answer to that is two things. One is make sure that you cover your soil immediately after you harvest your sweet potatoes. Soil does not want to be exposed. If you look at the land on the photograph that is left on my screen right now, not a single spot of earth is exposed. Land wants to be covered. And when we create our annual systems, oftentimes what we do is we leave our soil exposed to the elements, especially the sun. And if we harvest root crops, which I have lots of different root crops that I harvest, I immediately cover them with plant biomass, whether that's leaves, whether that's straw, whether that is plants that I cut with my scythe, and I just lay the plant biomass right over where I harvested. So the key is cover your soil, cover your soil, cover your soil. That is the number one thing that we're getting wrong as a species. The number one thing.
Okay. And then secondly, deer pressure. What would be a answer for deer pressure? Fenced area?
Great question. Yeah, so great question. It's a very hard equation. And I don't, if you have a small 1/4 acre backyard or something like that, I'll just say that so much of the rhetoric about food forest, it's like plant a food forest and feed yourself and it'll take care of itself in perpetuity and all of those things. If you're the singular food supply for miles around, you're going to have all the animals, not just deer, coming to your yard. And what I say to that is we need to produce more abundance in every ecosystem. We have to have more abundance in our neighborhoods. Go to the corridors where the animals are already at and start putting more edible abundance for them there. Tree tubes do work, but I would get them up to 5-6 feet. If you're gonna just grow, plant it and forget it. Cages work, but man, with the kind of maladapted vines that can actually grow right over cages and still grow over your tree and kill them, that requires a lot of effort. The tubes actually give you the advantage that it's much easier to pull vines off of your tubes than it is off of a cage. But it is plastic and you do need to make sure that your tubes are recyclable. And then, yes, I also use deer fencing at scale, using things like a Great Pyrenees dog is also a very effective tactic. Yeah, there's a bit more to this, but I'll just go ahead and leave it there. Deer will learn a way through pretty much anything. And this is again part of the difficulty of investing in a system, but trying to plant systems that are plant and forget and not have human interaction. The more human interaction you have with a space, the less deer pressure you're going to experience.
Okay. Next hard question. What do you recommend when Canada thistle and field bindweed invade?
Yeah, great question. So most of the maladapted species that we deal with, they thrive in the land that we have disturbed the most. And with that, Canada thistle on the site that you see here in front of you, this is one of my forest gardens that we've planted. It's a time release of all the edible and medicinal plants. About 80% of this, when it was first growing back from corn and soy, GMO corn and soy back last year was 2016. 2017, it started growing back into early succession. 2018 is when I moved onto my site, and that is when the Canadian thistle started showing itself in mass. The state actually threatened to come and get a warrant and spray the entire site with Roundup because of the potential economic harm I was causing from the Canadian thistle. Here's what I'll say. Canadian thistle, if you don't want to use herbicide, cutting it down when the blossoms are purple, when they've used the majority of their energy prior to seed, and doing it if you can right before you get a rain, because rain will actually create a mildew and will stop the plant from being able to rebound and produce abundant seed. But here's the issue. If you do that mechanically, such as I did in 2019, I literally, the time to do that, ideally with scythes is what I would recommend. But I had to do it with a 15-foot bush hog because I'm on 158 acres. And that's right when the turkeys are roosting on their nests. It's right when all the ground nesting birds are on the ground. It's when the monarch butterflies have already laid their first set of eggs on the milkweed. And I literally had to commit eco-terrorism to hold back the Canadian thistle to get it to be below 20% of my land mass. And so once I achieved 20%, which I was able to do, I allow Canadian thistle to grow up to that 20% mark. I will not do any more intervention more than that. The wildlife absolutely loves it, and it gets selected out with biological succession. As goldenrod grows in, as asters grow in, it will select out that Canadian thistle in time, but you just need to keep it from reseeding itself. The other thing is Canadian thistle runners are delicious. It's a really yummy green. And what you can do is put a tarp over your Canadian thistle grove, and it will send all these like really fragile seeking strands. I don't know if any of you have seen that underneath of a tarp or plywood. And then you can actually lift it up and you can harvest those and eat it as a salad green, and it doesn't have the thorniness on it. So those rhizomes are so delicious.
That is very interesting to know. Okay, and a
Yeah.
related question, how to stop Canada goldenrod from becoming a monoculture?
Well, it won't become a monoculture if you allow succession to happen. It does become a monoculture otherwise. Here's what I'll say. We have a florist that harvests it, and she gets 85 cents a stem for the goldenrod. We import goldenrod for floral arrangements. And of course, we do get a lot of it when it's not in season, but we're still bringing it in from places like Chile and Colombia, even in the height of goldenrod season. It also makes the leaves make an oregano-like spice seasoning, and the blossoms make an amazing tea. As well as I use a goldenrod tincture for my daughter and I, 5-year-old daughter, who has really bad allergies, and it is the best allergy remedy I have ever utilized in my life. Way better than Zyrtec and eating raw honey and all the other things that I've done in the past. So that's that. I'll leave my answer there.
Okay. And I'm going to revisit one question. So the question about harvesting root crops, in particular, the 3 beds of sweet potatoes, the rest of the question was, should we use a broad fork, shovel? What would be the best way to?
Yeah. Well, the very best way to grow sweet potatoes is to grow it in a mound above the ground. So if you're doing it in raised beds, you're making a little extra work for yourself by having to dig for them. If you do it in a cloth bag, or if you do it in my vertical growing systems that I showed you with fencing made into a cylinder, you can get one big slip and put it in there, and the whole thing will fill with sweet potatoes. And you just open your fencing and it'll pour out. That being said, whatever mechanism you use, I mean, yes, a broad fork might be great, but if you stab one of those sweet potatoes, it may be more difficult to use to store those over the winter time. I would just say, no matter what mechanism you use, just cover it up quickly. That's it. You know, you're making a disturbance for a plant that grows in disturbance. That's where sweet potatoes naturally grow. So don't feel shame for having to flip your soil a little bit.
Okay. And then the final several questions, I think this is final, is there a way, can we arrange a visit to the Reed Center to see what you have done?
Yeah, absolutely. The Reed Center website, I'll go ahead and link to it. This is what the Reed Center looks like. Well, as of last fall, I still haven't updated this fall. But there you go. If you want to scan that QR code or go to thereedcenter.org, my name is Ben at thereedcenter.org. We will gladly schedule a visit for folks. Saturdays tend to be our biggest days for when we get, we kind of a volunteer day. It's called a community day. We have volunteers at the beginning of the day. We'll be at this time of year planting trees. And then we usually have a potluck lunch together, kind of a thing. And then we'll do some kind of a class or a tour or something like that to finish out the day. But if you email me, I'd happily work out with anyone or any group that would like to come visit to get a tour or be ingratiated any way you wish.
Okay. I may have two more questions.
Okay.
Oh, no, they're all about the Reed Center, so I think we're good.
Okay, great. And yeah, there are so many different kinds of research that we're trying to do. We are a nonprofit, and the reason why we chose the nonprofit model was specifically because we didn't want to be forced economically into extracting everything we could from the land. We could make some longer term decisions. And if there is anybody that would like to support the work that we're doing, we could really use it. The money goes such a long way. And yeah, if you'd like to come visit and learn more about the specific projects that we're trying to do to basically lift all boats and help as many projects such as our, that want to do things like this get launched and not be stuck into getting instantaneous profit returns on their systems. We would love to hear from anybody that could help support us.
Okay. I was going to say thank you very much, and I'm so glad you found a quiet corner of the Frankfurt airport to do this with.
Yeah.
That one last question was, did you have any favorite books or other information sites that you would recommend?
Okay, so a couple of things. I already mentioned Michael Judd's book, Edible Landscaping with a Permaculture Twist. For those of you that are just beginning, if you're in an HOA, that book is so perfect for that type of a setting. Braiding Sweetgrass, for those of you that haven't read it yet, Robin Wall Kimmerer, one of those humans that sit on my heart and keep me calm through the chaos that's happening globally. And she reads her own audiobook. If you like audiobooks, her voice is so calming. Some people fall asleep to it, but I love it. And then if anybody would like my resource packet that I give my students, which is books on all kinds of topics, hydrology, food forestry, energy systems, permaculture, Yeah, I will gladly share that with you. Just email me at ben@thereadcenter.org, and I will send you my resource list. And I give it away, and just ask anybody that would like to give a donation for that resource list. We'd be greatly appreciated. But I'm happy to share it with anybody.
Okay, thank you so much. Really, really interesting presentation.
Wonderful to be here, and thank you for your patience with my technological situation.
All went well.
All right.
I'm going to turn it
Be
back.
well, everybody.
Yep, turn it back over to Steve.
Thanks, Tina. Hey, thank you. Thanks very much for the great presentation, Ben. So right now we're gonna switch to our next speaker, but I think we'll take about a 10-minute break here, bathroom break, get up, move around, stretch your legs, that sort of thing. And in the meantime, I will hook up with Tom and get his screen set up, that sort of thing. Just do a little business here, housekeeping. So 10 minutes. I got 10:33. Let's say 12 minutes. And I'll make it, I don't know, 10:45. So. So I'm gonna go ahead, got everyone, and just what I gotta tell everybody. We're gonna do the same sort of format before with questions. Tina's gonna watch it over here in the chat box, and she's gonna manage that. But I'm gonna go ahead and introduce our next speaker, Tom Farquhar from Sandy Springs Gardens. So I went and did a quick little thing last night and did a little bio about Tom, and Tom grew up in Brookville in an old farmhouse with chickens, pigs, and a big vegetable garden. He was also a member of the 4-H Sheep and Swine Club, where he viewed the Montgomery County Fair, and that was apparently his highlight of the summer. Sounds like it. So, he's working at the Tom. I might need help to Colsum Farm.
I worked at Tusculum Farm. Was
Tusculum. I was saying it right last night. Tusculum Farm. During his high school and college years, he gained a deeper appreciation for farmers and farm life. After 40-year career in education, he returned to Montgomery County to establish Sandy Spring Gardens in 2017. Sandy Springs Gardens is located in Ashton, Maryland, where he grows 50 types of vegetables with a focus on hyper-local market channels. So, got a small little bio brief there, Tom, but I hope that covers most of it. I'm glad you're here. I'll hand it over to you. Let you take it away. Thank you, Tom.
well, thank you, Stephen, and to all the master gardeners. It's a privilege to be have this opportunity to speak with you today, share a little bit of what we do. And we're at an interesting scale. We're growing vegetables for delivery, several days every week. We drive a delivery truck out with hundreds of pounds of product. But basically, we're gardeners, and we tend to use some equipment and some techniques that allow us to scale up a little bit but we're still very inefficient. We don't have the efficiencies of the big California and Florida growers. But then we believe our product, which Stephen described as hyper local, and we would also say hyper fresh, because we can harvest one morning and deliver the same day or the next day. And we think that has an impact on the quality of the food. So happy to describe for the group here a little bit about Sandy Spring Gardens, but mainly I want to talk about our production techniques and approaches that we believe create a superior food product. And it's not a secret to folks on this call that we have a food crisis in the United States in terms of the nutrient quality of the foods that Americans are choosing or that have been promoted for Americans to choose. And of course, the food quality has contributed, or the nutritional quality or lack of it has contributed to the what are sometimes called the diseases of civilization, obesity, overweight, high blood pressure, heart disease, cancer, et cetera. So one of the things we're really dedicated to is producing what we believe is the very most nutrient-dense vegetables, but vegetables that people are familiar with. I was really impressed and inspired by Ben Fritton's presentation, the previous presentation, and I want to learn more from him and about him, because his permaculture techniques some of those are ones that we could, employ in vegetable production. But it's also true that vegetable production does often involve soil disturbance. So we're not truly a permaculture operation, although we do what we can to minimize soil disturbance. The picture on this page is from August 15, where the team is beginning to incorporate a compost into these growing beds. These beds will soon have, after this, we'll have broccoli and collards in them. In fact, just a note, my team is actually watching the show right now, and the young woman on the right, all the way on the far right of this photo, this is her job interview. She came for a morning to work with us, and now she's with us permanently because the job interview is pretty simple here. You want to work for $15 an hour, come and help us out at Sandy Spring Gardens. This is the deal. But to take a close look at this picture, because the next picture is going to be this same field this morning. That's the collards and the broccoli. Same spot, same angle as what you just saw. This field has had the benefit of some compost addition and also biochar. Later we'll see a slide of biochar. I'm not suggesting that everybody needs to use biochar, but we're participants in a University of Delaware experiment where biochar is being shared in quantity. I've received 3 tons of biochar, which is essentially charcoal, powdered charcoal, made from chicken litter, from chicken manure, commercial chicken manure. And something else to notice here, we'll talk more about biochar in a bit. Something else to notice here is that the tomato patch, which previously looked pretty healthy on August 15, is looking pretty dismal now. The outdoor tomato field has suffered the late blight, powdery mildew. It's basically the diseases that are associated with, remember 14 straight days of rain and cloudy weather that we had. Well, that in our climate, especially when there were warm nights, often in nights the temperature did not go below 60 degrees, so that's abnormally warm temperatures for this part of the fall. So that's the ideal conditions for fungus diseases to attack the leaves of our vegetable plants. And those tomatoes are pretty much finishing up. We'll harvest them today, but in a few days, we'll start pulling out all that infrastructure associated with structuring the tomatoes. That system is called Florida Weave, which we use for a half acre of tomato planting each year. Going on, this is a harvest this morning. The team is harvesting kale. We will send out, as pointed out here in the slide, we have 1,300 feet of row of kale in these 3 beds. And we'll harvest 200 pounds this morning, and it will go out tomorrow morning to one of the food assistance providers in Montgomery County. We actually work with a dozen food assistance providers, soup kitchens, and food pantries that are handing out food to food insecure families in Montgomery County. It's our primary business, is the supply of the food assistance system, supported by Manna Food Center, which created a number of years ago a program they call Farm to Food Bank. They receive funding from private foundations and county government money. They receive some federal money, and they support small farms and actually will pay a wholesale price. They created a wholesale price list, and they'll pay us a wholesale price for these deliveries that we make to the food assistance charities across the county. This is lettuce this is April 20th. We call this structure a tunnel. It's a high tunnel. It's not a very high one, but it's a small high tunnel. And the growing in undercover this way protects the crop from what could be pounding rain, which is something we seem to get more often now with changes in the climate. And we use this woven fabric on the ground. It allows you see there's a wobbler there, a sprinkler head. We use sprinkler heads there. So this is not a solid block of plastic. This is, or a sheet of plastic. This is a woven plastic that allows the sprinkler water to go on down through and reach the crop. But this plastic is used for weed control. It also warms the soil early in the spring. So we use some of that, especially in the tunnels. You can see the side of the tunnel can be rolled down to give us more warmth in the early spring when we might need that. But that's how you can get a commercial lettuce crop in mid-April, by using some kind of protected culture of this sort. We, in addition to supplying food assistance, we have a community-supported agriculture program where we distribute a box of vegetables, seasonal vegetables, freshly harvested, every week to our CSA customers who are, we call them members of our CSA program, and they subscribe to this weekly delivery of vegetables. They pay in advance of the season, and then they get vegetables from May through early November. This particular box has lettuce, spinach, arugula, garlic, green garlic. There's parsley there, and beets, lettuce, radishes. We have a farm stand on Sundays at shameless self-promotion here at the Olney Farmers Market runs 9 to 1 on Sundays, and we're there every Sunday from early May until early November. This is one of the food assistance providers, Hughes United Methodist Church, is on Georgia Avenue in Wheaton. Literally 1,000 households will be served each week with this program. And you may, if you've driven down, Georgia Avenue at the right time, you would see, people lined up around the block at Hughes United Methodist Church. It's a large church, and now is serving food insecure families in the Wheaton area. And those are our collards this past Tuesday on the a bench there. And I love the expression on that woman's face, because, it won't surprise you that a lot of the food that goes through the food assistance system is non-perishable food. A food drive will often be a canned food drive. And the idea is, let's make sure these are shelf stable. The food assistance system can store it for as long as they need to before they distribute it to the families in need. But a non-perishable diet is not a healthy diet. And fresh vegetables are essential. We actually delivered some peppers that a farmer near me grew. He prefers to donate those. He'll receive a tax deduction for that. I actually sell my collards to Manna Food Center, that then allows for me to deliver these to the food assistance provider and the families to pick them up. We delivered 200 pounds of collards that day, and it was just this week. And the beauty of this particular distribution system is it's called a free choice pantry. The families can come through and pick up the food items that they really want, or they know, or they recognize, they are interested in cooking. There are other systems where a bag is packed in advance by a group of volunteers, and then the families just pick up the pre-packed bag, and that has its virtues. Among them, it introduces families to vegetables they may not be as familiar with. But it could be possible that some families, not recognizing kale, might throw it away, and that's a dagger in my heart. I want all this food to actually go to be consumed. This is another very important food assistance provider in the county, Community Farm Share. This is our largest customer, actually, and we developed together a contract back in February and March for what products and what months, what weeks actually, we'll be delivering the product. And they assemble over 400 boxes of and bags of food that go to food insecure families, either through the schools, through health department programs. The Montgomery County Health Department has a program called Food as Medicine. And families that are struggling with high blood pressure or diabetes may be identified as recipients of a weekly bag of fresh vegetables grown in Montgomery County, or at least locally grown. And Community Farm Share is making these connections between the farmers and the consumers. And volunteers do overwhelmingly, really all the work to put these boxes together and to get them out to the families. Let's talk about soil. Our agricultural soils probably have been abused. And Ben, at the earlier presentation, made the point that there are much better ways of managing and treating soil to optimize its productivity and really to support a healthy global environment. But healthy soil is a mineral substrate. The minerals come out of the bedrock, gradually weathering through various chemical and biological processes that occur sometimes deep in the ground. The bedrock degrades, it's weathered. It means it breaks up into its mineral components. and it becomes often smaller particles of sand or clay. But that's less than half of what's really going on in the soil is the minerals. Water in a healthy soil that's ready to support plant growth, water is about a quarter of the volume by weight. Air is a quarter of the volume by a quarter of the volume. I'm sorry. Water is 25% of the volume. Air is 25% of the volume. Organic matter makes up 5%, and that 5% is very important. But before we leave this slide, let's just point out, if we get a absolute, downpour, and we see more of these every year, where we could get more than an inch an hour. The Weather Service defines heavy rain as anything more than a third of an inch of rain per hour. Well, there are times this summer where we've gotten way more than a third of an inch of rain in an hour, and sometimes an inch and a half of rain in an hour will happen. Well, that could easily fill the airspace in the soil with water. And if that airspace stays full of water for a day or more, that will really have a negative impact on plant growth, because the roots need to have access to air. The biological activity in the soil requires a mixture of water and air, as well as the mineral and organic contact. All those elements are necessary for the soil to function in this magical and mysterious way that it does to support plant growth and eventually to support human health. So if you wonder why we would do raised beds, even in a commercial farming scale, the reason is to prevent flooding of the soil in the root zone. The aisles, which are lower than the bed, can absorb that flooded water and often carry it away to a grassy area where it can dissipate or be recharge the groundwater. And the bed itself will still be able to sustain some air in the soil matrix, even in a heavy downpour. A heavy downpour, believe it or not, compacts the soil. A heavy downpour compacts the soil. And even if you don't walk on the soil or drive a tractor across the soil, soil will be compacted by downpours. And one more important reason to keep the soil covered, Ben Fritton made this point, keep it covered, keep the soil covered, keep the soil covered, he said, repeating for emphasis. And covering the soil with growing vegetation. And the roots continue to keep the soil looser and prevent reduced compaction. So we want all these elements to be present in the soil. Now we want to take a closer look, though, at that 5%, the organic matter. Here is our soil test. Soil test we did a couple of years ago was one that was handy. And these are fields. I have 26 fields. Most of them are 1/10 of an acre. Some are a half acre, some are full acre, depending on what crops would be going in there. But these are the first 5 fields labeled F1 through F5. And you see that arrow is pointing to the column that says OM. That's the percent of organic matter. 5.5, 6.4, 5.8, 4.9, 5.1. Around or above 5% organic matter is where an organic grower wants to have the organic matter. That level of organic matter in the soil will release nitrogen to the growing plants throughout the season. Often enough nitrogen that you don't need any nitrogen fertilizer whatsoever to have a successful crop. And this is the natural way that soil fertilizes plants. The plants in the forest are growing without additional fertilizer, and many of them are doing quite well. So it's this breakdown of organic matter through biological action in the soil is what releases plant available nutrients from the mineral substrate and from decaying organic matter in the soil. So if you were to look at soils that have been plowed year after year, conventional, let's say corn ground in a part of the country where they are plowing the soil and disking it, tilling it, creating a seed bed, planting the corn, very often in those situations, the organic matter will have fallen below 1%. And so organic matter with 1%, soil with 1% organic matter is going to look very different from soil with 5% or more organic matter. The soil rich in organic matter is darker, that's humus. It's going to be looser, it's going to have a different texture, it's going to absorb moisture, but it's also going to allow the excessive moisture to drain out, but it will retain enough moisture for plant growth. So these levels of organic matter, if I were a backyard gardener, I would want to work with my soil until I get the soil test to show an organic matter level at 5%, between 5% and 10% would be where I would want to be. A portion of that organic matter is living organic matter. This is the bodies of fungi and bacteria in the soil, living, alive. It's a vitally important part of the soil organic, component. As this pie chart shows, 65% of the organic matter in the soil is humus. Humus is that dark, largely decomposed organic matter that is important in improving the texture of the soil, and slowly over time, it will release nutrients to the growing plants and make them the nutrients bioavailable. Fresh residues are also a very important part. That's 10%, that top pie slice. Very important part of the organic matter in the soil. That means that somehow fresh material must have been introduced into the soil, either by tillage or roots that are breaking down are fresh material, leaf litter on the surface or compost on the surface that's breaking down. The lower, if you have a mulch, the top level of that might be fairly stable in the sunlight, but the bottom level against the soil and with moisture is being broken down by soil organisms and worms, critters of all sorts. And that's adding fresh residue to the soil. And those biological processes are extremely important to the organic release of fertility to the plants. 15% is called resistant organic matter. Resistant organic matter could very well be present in the soil today and be present in the soil, that same organic matter 100 years from now. Charcoal, the biochar, would fit into that fraction. And most of us may not have a charcoal in our soil, but there are other soil particles that are resistant to breakdown. Wood is an example of something sort of, it lies at the boundary between resistant organic matter and fresh residue, because wood breaks down. It has lignin, is a very resistant, hard organic form carbon compound, and it breaks down very slowly. If you put wood chips into your soil and hope to grow vegetables, that's not going to be the best way to put fresh organic matter in your soil. You'd like to have leaves, leaf litter, grass clippings. Those are the kinds of fresh organic matter that will break down quickly under the action of the living organic matter, the bacteria, the fungi, the other, here's a whole sort of menu of soil microorganisms that we would find in the soil. The two that we really are most interested in discussing are the fungi and the bacteria. And depending on the amount of soil disturbance, your soil will become weighted in favor of bacteria or weighted in favor of fungi. And most highly disturbed soils, if they have organic material and they've not been poisoned with various, addition of synthetic fertilizers or synthetic chemical pesticides, most organic soils that are disturbed, in other words, tilled, like with a rototiller, will tend to be supporting a bacterial community more than a fungal community, because fungi have hyphae, which are the threads, the little microscopic threads that move out through the soil and are consuming organic matter in the soil. And fungi actually can play a very important part in supporting plant nutrition. But highly disturbed soil has less fungal activity because the hyphae are broken and are not able to develop. The actual body of the fungus is the hyphae. That mushroom that we see is the fruiting body. But you add up all the biomass of the threads of fungus in the soil, that's actually the fungus down there. And the fruit is the mushroom, which is just a portion, and only possible because of all the biological activity in the soil as the threads of fungus move out through the soil and attach to organic matter, but also attach to the roots of plants. And we now know that fungi, hyphae can deliver nutrients and moisture to the roots of the plants through what's called the mycorrhizal zone, the place where the fungus and the root come together. And in fact, it's now believed the fungus actually penetrates into the root and develops a symbiotic relationship, because the root gives something to the fungus. The root gives food energy to the fungus. That food energy came from photosynthesis. The fungus cannot photosynthesize. It gets its energy from organic matter, and it can receive energy from plant root exudates, the materials that are come down to the plant root and can be excreted by the plant roots. We share with you some of our techniques. We use beneficial plantings. This is a beneficial flower bed. Wildflowers, the California poppies are the first ones to come out. And you can see in the right-hand picture, this beneficial bed is right next to our brassicas, our broccoli bed. Broccoli is vulnerable to the cabbage looper worm. We've all experienced that if we've grown our brassicas. Cabbage, broccoli, kale, the cabbage looper in the spring can be very damaging. But there are parasitic wasps that will lay their eggs either inside the worm or inside the eggs of the cabbage looper moth. You see these little white moths with a little black spot on their wing flittering around the brassicas every spring. I used to try to catch them with a butterfly net, and one year I was harvesting and I had the butterfly net near at hand, and I grabbed the butterfly net. I took a big swing at a cabbage looper moth, and I severely cut my finger with the harvest knife, which was in the other hand. So I decided maybe it wasn't a good idea to try to catch these moths. There's no point. There are hundreds of them out there. But the key is to support a beneficial predator community of insects, wasps and other critters, ladybugs, that will actually feed on the eggs or on the worms of the cabbage looper moth. Now, we also use an organically approved insecticide. It's called Bacillus thuringiensis, BT. You gardeners know it because it's very effective at controlling it. When sprayed in the proper dilution on the brassica crop, cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, you have to control the cabbage looper on all these, either through natural means or through some kind of organic fertilizer, or organic pesticide. When sprayed on the leaves, then the worm eats the leaf, and the digestive system of the worm is paralyzed by this bacterium, which is essentially harmless to humans. So the product can be marketed the same day that the spray was applied without any harmful effect for human beings. Bacillus thuringiensis is a bacterium that is harmless to humans, but is not good for the gut of the worms. Now, it should be said, there are many, many beneficial insects and insects that we very much want to support in the environment that have a larval a stage where they are a caterpillar. Think the monarch butterfly. So we don't want to use BT indiscriminately. And I'm very sad to have to report to you that the toxin in BT has been genetically engineered into corn in this country, field corn and sweet corn. So we now have massive representation in the natural environment of this toxin, which is having I have to believe, I need to study this more, but I have to believe it's having a very harmful effect on the natural world of insects that have a larval stage, a caterpillar stage. So, that's a lot to think about there. This is the spreading of our biochar. You're going to see a style of agriculture here, which is just one step above the backyard garden. We use the tractor to make certain steps more efficient. I manage 13 acres. I don't own any farmland at all. I use my neighbor's land. I live on a half-acre lot. And my flower beds are unkempt because the farm is such a stern taskmaster. I manage 13 acres. We actually, right now, are actively growing probably on only less than an acre, partly because we've had some crop failures, but also some crops have finished up. The summer squash is done. Potatoes are done. The brassicas, so we have some brassicas, just leafy greens in the fall, but we have a few broccoli out there. But we had big broccoli, cauliflower crops, cabbage crops in the spring, which went to food assistance. The biochar, as I said, was provided by a researcher at University of Delaware, and he's I wouldn't call it an experiment, really. It's a sort of a study maybe on giving the biochar at the rate of tons at a time to small farmers and seeing how we use it and how we feel about it. So we're not doing a controlled experiment. I put some biochar down before we transplanted our last crop of summer squash out there. And I inadvertently, I changed varieties from a yellow squash to a zucchini squash, a green zucchini. And the yellow squash part got the biochar and the green zucchini part didn't. So too many variables to be considered a controlled experiment. But I think we did feel that we had a very successful summer squash crop there, and the biochar may have helped. Let's talk about the soil horizons. Soil, natural soil, this is a prairie soil we're seeing here represented, but a forest soil would do some of the same thing. You've got at the bottom, the mineral substrate. This is weathered rock that's begun to break down and come apart due to weathering is the action of water and air, oxygen that gets down there, but also biological activity and roots in the soil will also break up the subsoil. Horizon B is called subsoil, and that's a less organic matter there, but the roots do extend into Horizon B for moisture, for minerals, and there is some biological activity and some organic matter in Horizon B from the roots that have broken down from previous, plant life. A is topsoil, and O is the richest organic matter. That's where leaf litter or prairie grass remains, the annual grasses or the grasses that break down, and the litter is left on the soil and quickly is incorporated into the very top layer of the soil by soil organisms, especially those active little, bugs and worms. If we plow the soil and we take the top 12 to 20 inches and we turn it over, that we now know, even though that's the main, the primary form of soil preparation for centuries in the Western world, when we turn the soil over, we invert this structure and we actually do damage to the soil. The subsoil comes to the surface, the organic matter is buried, and the organic matter is deprived of the oxygen that the living organisms need to continue to do their magic in breaking down organic matter. The subsoil is very susceptible to erosion. So we want at all costs to try to avoid the inversion of the soil structure, the soil profile, which was typical in the past, but has caused great harm. And we don't want to do that kind of harm to the soil anymore. Here's a sort of snapshot of a cutaway of prairie soil. And you can see there's 12 inches or more of a very rich organic matter at the top. The prairie grasses over millennia have grown. Their roots have grown and died, and added organic matter, and microorganisms have been busy at work digesting those. So these were the very rich soils of the American Midwest. Some places that dark layer is actually 100 feet deep, in places in Iowa and Nebraska, from the millennia of the undisturbed growth of the prairie. It may be that some burning of the prairie by the indigenous population contributed to the health of the ecosystem there and the productivity of the soil. And of course, you had the buffalo ranging in enormous herds, leaving their fecal matter there to further enrich the soil. To take this kind of soil and just plow it deeply, it does great harm to this soil profile. Let me make an adjustment here. It's very important, I think, as we talk about the human contribution to the carbon dioxide component in the atmosphere, to understand that carbon can be stored in the soil, that healthy soil, when I say it contains organic matter, that's tantamount to saying it contains carbon. Carbon compounds are the compounds that form that dark humus. And as this paragraph explains, this is Dr. Sarah Villa, is a professional on the University of Maryland faculty, an agronomist. And she's written a wonderful book called Increasing Soil Health and Sequestering Carbon in Ag Soils. The book was first commissioned by the Maryland Department of Agriculture. She researched this thing for several years, wrote a really amazing and wonderful book. It's hardly available. The Department of Agriculture backed out of publication of it. And finally, it was published by the Isaac Walton League of America and the National Wildlife Foundation. Why would the Maryland Department of Agriculture decide to step away from this really groundbreaking research that Dr. Via did? Well, I'll leave you to think about that, but needless to say, it's pretty radical to say that farming could change in a way that would make an enormous contribution to mitigating the excess carbon released into the atmosphere by human activities. This would become, agriculture could be the human activity that would reverse so much of the damage been done from burning fossil fuels over the past centuries. So the Earth's soil can store over twice the amount of carbon dioxide found in the atmosphere. Yet in just 150 years, agricultural soils worldwide have lost a large fraction of the sequestered carbon as a result of agricultural practices that leave soil unprotected. Ben said, cover the soil, cover the soil, cover the soil. Unprotected. And, one of the questioners this morning said, how can I, reduce the damage to the soil from digging sweet potatoes? Digging sweet potatoes is very harmful to the soil. Growing potatoes is harmful to the soil. There are organic growers in Montgomery County that are my friends that say, I won't grow potatoes because they're so harmful to the soil. And actually, I was interested in Ben's technique that he described this morning for growing potatoes and sweet potatoes in a sort of a mound that would allow that all to be above the soil structure, and then it would spill out without harming the soil structure beneath. Global losses of soil carbon following land conversion to agriculture comprise about 20% of all historical carbon dioxide emissions caused by humans. This is so important, and we're not hearing a lot about how agriculture could, with revised practices, that's the problem. Who wants to revise their practices? The status quo is powerful in its way of persevering. Oops. Okay, what I do wrong here? How to increase and then maintain high soil organic matter levels above 5%, minimize soil disturbance to maintain soil structure, keep soil surface covered with living plants or with mulch or crop residue, rotate cover crops and perennials to increase biodiversity. Species with extensive roots and big above ground biomass are good choices for cover crops, and add organic materials like composts, manures, hay, straw, or wood chips. Here is an example of a practice. This is a field of brassicas. You see kale, several different types of kale here. There also is collards and cabbage in this field. And if you look closely, you'll see that there's a crop residue on the ground in these aisles. That's actually ryegrass, which was rolled down before these transplants were set into these rows. So we grew planted in October, the previous season, a ryegrass in a field that was tilled. We ran a tiller through there in order to plant the ryegrass. We got a really abundant ryegrass crop by May. We rolled that down. We put a tarp on it to make sure it was really dead. I'll show you some of. This is another field where we minimized the disturbance in the aisles. In order to plant this row of transplants of summer squash, we planted these in mid-July. This picture's taken maybe August 1st. The aisles actually had a very strong oats cover crop over winter. The oats, usually most of them, they're supposed to die in the winter, but they didn't because it wasn't that cold this winter. And we rolled this down, we mowed it, and then I took, brace yourself, a moldboard plow to make a little trench, just one furrow. And the top of the furrow became the place where we put the transplants. Remember, we have to make sure in a deluge, in a very heavy rain, we don't drown the roots. So I put them on this little ridge that was made with a single furrow, one furrow every 6 feet. These rows are 6 feet apart. And that just made a little bit of an elevated place for the transplant to be set, and a little bit of a trench to carry away any excess rain that might come. But otherwise, this field was undisturbed from the cover crop planting. And that allowed the fungal resources growing in the soil to remain undisturbed. And those fungal resources will feed the plants. Here are these plants just a couple of weeks later. You can see some weeds are growing in the aisles. We don't worry about that. These squash are easily able to photosynthesize far above the leaf layer. And that was this crop, this yellow squash got the biochar, and it was a great crop. I should mention something about varieties. This yellow squash is not a variety that you would find in a commercial supermarket. The yellow squash in a commercial supermarket will be selected for the uniformity of shape and size, for the ability to harvest all at once, and for shippability, storability. Those qualities, and of course, yield is also a huge factor in commercial agricultural production. The squash that will produce 30,000 pounds per acre is always going to be planted commercially versus the one that produces 20,000 pounds per acre, because it's all about the profit. And the food for the farmer, even the big commercial farmer, the sale of this product is done at a really, really low price because the money is made in food distribution all along the way, but not so much at the level of the farmer, whether small farmer or large farmer. So the large farmer is going to grow the most heavily yielding squash that he or she can. The result, friends, is that the nutritional value of our food has gone down. This is a well-established fact that over 50 years, the vegetables grown in the United States have less nutrition than they did, 50 years ago. Today, less nutrient density. We try to grow in our operation, and most small growers try to grow the garden varieties that are not selected for maximum yield, but are selected for flavor. And I have this belief, maybe it's a myth, but I have this belief that if it tastes really great, and a unadulterated vegetable cooked very simply tastes really great, I believe it's more nutritious than a vegetable with the same name that does not taste really great when prepared the same way. So that's my belief. That's my story. I'm going to stick with it. But I think, we try to grow the best tasting vegetables we can, and we don't care if it's 20,000 acres versus 30,000. Now, it's also true, I'm a retiree. I work full time at this, but I'm not making any money. Not yet. I hope one day I can break even or even show a little profit, because then my model will be one that I can share with others who might want to embrace it. That my model is growing vegetables on a small scale on your neighbor's land for distribution to food insecure. Here's a volunteer harvest that was done by one of the food assistance providers called Nourishing Bethesda. And the director of Nourishing Bethesda, the founder and director, was founded during the pandemic. They distribute at the Bethesda Rescue Squad on Old Georgetown Road. And he said, we have a lot of volunteers, but I don't really have enough for them to do. We put together these bags every week for 400 people, food insecure people, and they come through and pick up the bags. But I'd like to have more things for our volunteers to do. Could we come out and harvest? Well, there's a tomato field behind these folks. That's our tomato field. That's our Florida weave, our system for trellising them. You can see the aisles are completely weedy. We mow the aisles. Actually, the tomato row itself the tomato plants are put through a 3-foot wide band of plastic covering, and there's drip tape underneath there. But notice there's really no exposed soil in that field at this point. There was exposed soil when we built the beds, but now it's pretty resistant to any damage that might be done by a heavy rain. And this is just 1 hour of harvest. We've got 1,500 pounds of tomatoes there, and their condition is fabulous, and the taste is off the charts. Now, that was last year. We've had some problems with the tomato harvest this year, and I'll go into that later. This is last year's. You see the weeds and crabgrass in the aisle, and we don't worry about that too much, partly because we don't have enough labor to do anything about it. And the tomatoes seem to be growing and pretty happy. Now, tomatoes at this stage are fully ripe, and they will not make it in a truck for 100 miles. If I had to send these 100 miles away, I would not pick them at this stage. I would pick them at a little bit greener stage. We call it breaker stage, where we know they will go to full ripe. But the beauty of this is these tomatoes have a flavor that you just can't get in the store, and often you can't get it at the farmer's market. and partly because the varieties grown at the farmer's market are sometimes not the flavorful varieties. They're the high yielding varieties and the disease resistant varieties. And sometimes those just don't taste as good. This is another, 2 weeks later, another group, Community Farm Share, sent volunteers to harvest with us. And this was an hour-long harvest. And these folks picked these tomatoes and we sent them off to food assistance. This is mowing down a cover crop of wheat. Wheat is a nice cover crop. We're not going to harvest this as a cash crop. We don't even have a way to harvest wheat. And so we will mow this down with a flail mower. That mower really chops up the wheat. And then we might dig it in with very shallowly with a tiller, or we might just cover it with a tarp. And then the worms would come up and digest all this green biomass that's been added to the soil. Also note that this field was weedy before we planted wheat in it, but the wheat has outcompeted the weeds. The weeds would germinate, not see enough light, and that eliminates a generation of weed seeds in the soil bank, which is a good thing. Here's another cover crop. This is an 8-foot high sorghum Sudan grass hybrid cover crop. Even in the home garden, you could use this amazing cover crop, sorghum Sudan grass hybrid. It has very deep roots. It produces a huge amount of biomass. It competes successfully with weeds. It adds fertility to the soil. It improves soil texture. It can be planted in the summer. You know, once you get to June 1st, this will grow abundantly. If you have some area in your garden that can be set aside for soil development, or if you want to start a garden, wouldn't be a bad idea to grow several cover crops for a full year and then start your garden the next year, and you'll be relatively weed-free and soil with great texture and fertility right out of the gate. This is the ryegrass and hairy vetch cover crop combination that we grow. And you can see the little purple blossoms are the hairy vetch. That's a legume. It fixes nitrogen and adds nitrogen to the soil through the roots and also when the body of the cover crop is incorporated into the soil. What we're looking at here is the pollen bodies on the rye seed stalk. And those are called anthers. And the anthers carry the pollen for the rye. And at this stage where the anthers have formed, they don't all form at the same time. So you kind of find a time when most of the rye seed stalks have anthers. This is the time to roll down the rye crop and to hope that by rolling it, crimping it, the rye plant says, well, I've reproduced, I can quit now. Rye really doesn't like to quit. This is called terminating the cover crop. It's one of the challenges of the use of cover crops is you have to seed it, you have to grow it, you have to see that there's enough water and fertility for it to thrive, and then you have to terminate it so that it doesn't become a weed in your next crop that you're actually trying to grow for production. But at this very stage, if you roll it down too early, the rye will say, hey, I haven't reproduced, I got to keep growing. It'll pop right back up and start growing again. But if you get it at this stage, it can lie down and sort of give up the ghost. And then you can transplant your fall transplants like brassicas, broccoli, kale, cabbage, cauliflower, right through the rolled down residue of this very abundant high biomass cover crop. Here's the tool we use with a tractor to roll down the cover crop. You can see how heavy the biomass is. And look at that mulch on the ground. If that would just die, then the world would be a more wonderful place for us. It doesn't quite. Some of it dies, but some of that rolled down mat will want to live. So we found in practice, we have to put a tarp on top of that for 3 weeks to really tell it, you're done. We're now growing something else on top of you. Our primary source of compost is spent mushroom soil from Kennett Square, Pennsylvania. We get 3 or 4 of these tractor trailer loads, 40,000 pounds per load of spent mushroom soil. It's a wonderful compost. It's weed-free. It has low fertility, but it does amazing and wonderful things for the soil fertility because the biological, the microbiology of our soil loves getting this stuff to feed on. And when microbiology is active, abundant, and happy in the soil, fertility is released by a combination of the organic matter, which can be converted into plant-available forms of nutrients, and also by the mineral substrate, which will release some of its mineral content through the acids that are released by the microbiology as it performs its action. Here, the team is putting down mushroom soil on the growing beds. Again, we use beds to keep the root zone a little bit above the general level of the field so that a deluge will not drown the plants. This is actually Leaf Grow, which is the Montgomery County composted leaf product. And we use that as well. And I think this is the Montgomery County Department of Agriculture provides one free load of leaf grow to us every year, which is a big asset. Here's the same soil report. And again, this is just a tiny piece of one soil report. As I said, I've got 26 soil tests, and here are just the 5 fields represented here. And you're only seeing 1/3, maybe 20% of the information that would appear on this whole page. This is just the upper left-hand corner of the page. But now I'm looking at the phosphorus column. It's the same organic matter column we saw before, but the phosphorus column shows that we have high levels of phosphorus on the farm, except for in field 4. The other fields, 1, 2, 3, and 5, have what are high levels of phosphorus. And that it's interesting that MD equals in that column, in that box, MD equals 118. That's a Maryland Fertility Index and the value, FIV. And the Maryland Fertility Index value is the state of Maryland Department of Agriculture working with the soil testing lab to say how much fertility is too much or more than you need for healthy plant growth. And the index value of 100 is the cutoff point between where you have just enough and above that you have more than you need. And Maryland, of course, doesn't want excess fertility in the soils, agricultural soils, to flow through erosion into the Chesapeake Bay or into the waters. Excess fertility does environmental harm. And it would look like a field like Field 2 with a Maryland index, fertility index value of 240 must be doing a lot of harm to the Chesapeake Bay. Well, one of the things that this piece of the chart is pointing out is that high levels of organic matter through compost addition tend to create high levels of phosphorus in the soil. We organic growers believe that this phosphorus is not mobile, that it doesn't dissolve in a heavy rain. We don't have, generally speaking, we don't have a lot of soil erosion from our farms. When there's a heavy rain, the soil flowing off the farm is usually clear, not muddy. And so we feel this is a side effect of heavy compost additions. We should be limiting compost addition, though, at this point in the fields where the Maryland Fertility Index is above 100. So if you're not doing soil tests and you're a gardener, I would recommend them. There's a lot of information here. If you get back all these numbers and you're not sure what to do about it, call me. I'm happy to walk people through their soil test. And when I started 7 years ago, I had no idea how to interpret this stuff. So a lot of learning has to happen. I have to learn, of course. Now this is our potato field. It's just been planted, and this is a sin against nature. This is the soil disturbance and the exposed soil that Ben mentioned. And we are not happy about this, but we don't know how to grow potatoes without doing this. At the scale of an acre, this is an 1.25 acre field. We hope to get 20,000 pounds of potatoes off of this and to sell them to the food assistance system of Montgomery County through MANA Food Center's Farm to Food Bank program, and to Community Farm Share through their food distribution program on a contract we have with them. You can see the aisles are where the tractor tires go. And we try to keep the aisles in the aisles so that the compaction is all there and that the growing bed is loose soil. And we know that this is literally the potato harvest just finished on this afternoon, and I took this picture. And we hope and pray that there's not a very heavy rain until the potatoes have begun to grow, some weeds will begin to grow, and the soil will become more stable and less susceptible to erosion. Well, less than 24 hours after we planted this field, we got a deluge. And it caused erosion. And this is a photograph taken the next morning of that same field. You can see how the soil has been compacted by the heavy rain. And here you can see a gully 2 inches deep, and soil has flowed off of the field. We don't love that. In fact, we really don't love that. Now, where the soil has flowed to is a large grassy area that we maintain for the purpose of capturing any soil that might come off. And by the time the rainfall here flowed off of the field, there was almost no muddy, character to the water because it had been filtered by this large grassy area. That's one of the things we do to try to maintain the soil on the farm, prevent it from leaving the farm, but it certainly, some of it has left the high ground, and that's not good. Now this gully is 2 inches deep. And in the world of agriculture, a gully 2 inches deep is not considered serious erosion. But for our organic operation, which is based on maintaining and improving the soil and at maximum health, this is a minor tragedy. And the timing of the rain was just awful for us. And that's a challenge that we face. And I might have to consult with Ben about how to do a better job and prevent this kind of thing from happening. The CDC has made these observations about an impact of climate change on human health. And these are the impacts that they list: air pollution, water quality. Hold a minute, let me get rid of this. Okay. Air pollution, water quality, water and food impacts, environmental degradation, extreme heat. Well, extreme rainfall certainly is having an impact on human health today. And they didn't mention extreme rainfall here, but extreme rainfall is a big problem on our farm. And keeping the soil covered, a mulch or even a tarp will help to preserve soil health in the face of these deluges, which are increasingly severe. This is a slide that just shows some of what happens to our tomatoes. And these are really good tasting tomatoes. They're not the tomatoes that were bred for resistance to this kind of cracking on the shoulder. This is an old-fashioned hybrid. It's not an heirloom tomato. It's an old-fashioned hybrid called Better Boy, Burpee's Better Boy, developed in the 40s or 50s. The first hybrid tomatoes were Burpee's Big Boy, and this is a knockoff from Burpee's Better Boy. And this shoulder cracking and this mold and mildew on the shoulder is a result of rainfall. We had 2 weeks of rainfall, in late September. And we also had heavy dew. We have heavy dew every day all summer. Even in dry weather, there's heavy dew. Dew is very hard on the tomato shoulder. Another thing that's hard on the tomato shoulder is ultraviolet light. Ultraviolet light is damaging for living tissues of all kinds. We human beings have evolved various defense mechanisms for over the our period of evolution for dealing with the problems of ultraviolet light. And the tomato actually has some solutions to ultraviolet attack, and this callus on the shoulder is one of those solutions. And in fact, here we have a good example of the difference between the tomato grown outdoors in the field and the tomato grown in the high tunnel. When you look at the high tunnel in the early morning, the dew is on the top of the tunnel, the top of the plastic. It's not on the foliage. So the foliage is spared the conditions which lead to fungal growth on the foliage of the tomato. So the tomato on the right just is so much more marketable. It looks so much better. I'm here to share with you a little secret that you probably shouldn't repeat. The tomato on the left is the one that tastes better. And no one in the Middle Atlantic growing tomatoes wants to admit that, because we want to sell the tomatoes that are grown on, the one that appears on the right, grown in the tunnel. But the one on the left tastes better because its response to the stress of ultraviolet light, its response to the stress of fungus, those responses have chemical implications inside the tomato, which translates to flavor and, I believe, nutrition. Well, just to wrap up here, I've really been inspired by a few books about our food. And I mentioned at the very beginning, outside of this talk, that there's a problem with our food in terms of its nutritional quality, either the choices we make, the stuff that's provided to us, or the way it was produced. And my story really is all about trying to find ways to produce the food so it has the nutritional value that fulfills the nutritional potential that a cabbage or a tomato or a potato could have. And our farmers market customers respond very positively to what they taste in our food, which I think is a marker for the nutrition. Farming practices have changed in ways that reduce the levels of beneficial compounds in our food, ranging from those in fruits and vegetables that help prevent cancer to fats in meat and dairy that modulate inflammation. You probably know that inflammation is the source of many, many health issues and diseases that we face in the developed world. And our food is and a decline in the value of our food nutritionally is a contributor. These are my last two slides. This is the yield of corn in the United States from 1886 to 2022. The yield before World War II tended to hover around 30 bushels per acre. The yield today in America is about 170 bushels per acre. And here's a question I would pose to you. I'd pose it to the, I'm curious to hear, I don't really know the answer. Is it possible that the nutrition in a pound of corn, where 170 bushels are coming off an acre, is the same high quality nutrition that was in a pound of corn at 35 bushels per acre? I think there's a problem here. We've chased yield at the expense of everything, because yield is money when it comes to agricultural products, and money is driving all the decisions. And I'm not sure we've looked closely enough at changes that are occurring in the quality of the food as we've chased high yield, uniformity of product, shippability, storability, all these variables that have become part of our national and international food system that may not be related to what food is really supposed to do, which is to promote human health. Thank you all for listening. And now we're happy to take questions.
Okay, we have a couple questions. One you answered, I think, but if you wanted to add any kind of detail to it, how you control pests of Brassilica without the row covers?
The primary pests, well, there are two pests we deal with that are significant for us. One is the cabbage looper moth, which lays an egg and it becomes a worm, and the worm eats everything. The other one is the harlequin beetle that comes along in warmer weather. In June, the harlequin beetle shows up, beautiful looking critter, and it eats the foliage. The adult eats the foliage and the nymphs eat the foliage. We have used row covers, but at our scale, I'm growing an acre of brassicas. It's very difficult to cover 100 rows with row cover and then to remove it when it gets too hot, to keep the edges tucked down so the bugs don't get underneath. And all we do for the cabbage looper worm is we plant beneficial plantings of flowers that attract the predator wasps, and we spray once or twice only with BT, Bacillus thuringiensis, the organic approved caterpillar insecticide. For the harlequin beetle, we have another technique because it's very difficult. There's nothing that we can use. We don't use toxic synthetic pesticides, chemical pesticides. So for the harlequin beetle, we have a rule that we try to ensure that there's a month in the summer with no brassicas on the field. Interestingly, the harlequin beetle only eats brassicas. This is your cabbage, kale, broccoli, cauliflower. And we have harvested the spring brassicas pretty much by June or the first week or two of July. Then we don't put out our fall brassica transplants until mid-August. So if we've got a month with no brassicas in the field, you're not going to believe this. The harlequin beetles go away and they don't come back. So that's our solution for them. Every crop, every bug requires its own particular management strategy. So again, you have to be learning all the time about what's going on in your garden and how you're going to deal with it. But we don't want to add a lot of synthetic chemicals to the field because we believe that's going to damage the soil biology. And again, that's may or may not be true, but that's our belief and we're sticking with it.
Okay. One whole month. Which flowers would you say are the best companions for kale, chard, some of the basilicas?
You know, I'm not good at the varieties of flowers. What I do is I buy a beneficials mix with 25 varieties in it. Johnny's Selected Seeds has a beneficial flower mix, wildflower mix, and we plant it, and it's beautiful. I mean, it's a beautiful feature on the farm when it all blossoms. It starts in May with the California poppies, and it moves on through to Queen Anne's lace, and there are asters in there. It's just a bachelor buttons. So I wouldn't pick one because you really want a whole diversity of beneficial insects to be supported by your beneficial planting. And I should plant more beneficial plantings. I've got, for every field, these fields here with brassicas in it are 1/10 of an acre each. They're roughly 48 feet wide and 100 feet long, and would have maybe 8 beds in them, 6 to 8 beds, depending on the spacing of the beds. And for every one of these small fields, 1/10 of an acre, I should have a 6-foot wide, 100-foot long bed of beneficial flower planting. That we really learned that this year, that the beneficial flowers will do a lot of good in terms of controlling the cabbage looper worm.
Okay. How to keep birds off tomatoes?
Well, we don't have a solution for that. I thought Ben's comment was interesting when he was talking about the deer. He said the problem really is we need a landscape that has more food for everything. And the fact is you're providing a candy store in a food desert, you know, for the birds. I've been reading about how important it is that the oaks, we provide more oaks and large oak trees in our built or habited environment because of the food supply they provide for birds. We don't keep the birds away from the tomatoes. In fact, we know that the birds are actively foraging on the worms in the tomato field. And you know that the tomato hornworm, of course, can do real damage. We sometimes pick, if we see a tomato hornworm, we pick it, but it camouflages pretty well. The hornworms that don't camouflage well are the ones that have the pupae of the trichogramma wasp poking out of it that are being parasitized. That's a great sight to see. And of course, I tell my team, don't pick that worm. We want that worm to stay there and continue to support those 30 little wasps that are going to, in the future, help to control the hornworm in our field.
Okay. How do you keep the corn ears safe from the squirrels and the
Corn is
raccoons?
a problem to grow. We've tried growing sweet corn. We didn't grow any this year. I'll tell you who likes corn. First of all, the corn earworm loves corn, and there's a moth that comes in and lays its eggs on the silk, and that's a problem. There's also there are a number of corn bugs that will burrow through the side of the husk. We've all seen those little black bugs in there. The raccoons love the corn, and you may not see raccoons all year, and suddenly you have a crop of sweet corn just getting ripe, and the raccoons show up. I've had the Canada geese walk into the cornfield and eat it right up. They just stretch their little heads up and they gobble it up. They tear up the ears. They're unmarketable, of course, after they've been munched on by a Canada goose. We found we could control, we have a deer fence around 10 acres of our field, but the Canada geese don't pay any attention to the deer fence. They fly right in. What we found is that the Canada geese cannot fly into the corn patch because their wings don't permit that. So they fly into the drive-through or into the pasture and they walk in. So we just put a single strand of wire, like 12 inches high, around the corn patch, and that blocked the Canada geese from being able to walk in, and they can't fly in because of the corn stalks. So again, each pest you need to have a strategy for, and it's learned by doing. The question was, what was the pest with squirrels?
Yes.
Yeah, squirrels are a problem. Now, on our farm, we don't have much trouble with squirrels because we have these big open expanses that you see on this slide. And a big open expanse is an invitation to hawks and even eagles. We've seen eagles out here. The raptors will come in and they'll grab the little guys. So the squirrels know to stay a lot closer to a tree. And they don't want to get out on this field. I've seen a rabbit once out in this field, and sure enough, a hawk came in and grabbed it and flew away with it. So rabbits aren't a problem here. So different context. has a different set of pest pressures and requires different strategies. So I can't really help with that. You'd have to, there are people who put a deer fence around their garden and then they put netting over the top, suspended about 8 feet to try to keep everything out. Somehow stuff finds its way anyhow. I mean, deer find their way into our deer fence and it's frustrating to us. And then they don't know how to get out and they stay in and eat for a while. So every pest has its issues and needs its own strategy. And to some extent, you're going to have losses and you're going to accept some losses. You can't be, make a fetish of preventing any crop loss to any predator or any, because you're going to have to grow some for them too.
Okay, I think this is my final one for pests. What about squash borers?
The squash borer is a bigger problem in the spring. And I think we grew some squash this spring, but it all died. I have friends who have had a really bad summer. There's something about the weather this year that has been extremely challenging for us and for other farmers like us. It was wet for 3 weeks in May. That kept the soil cold and we couldn't plant the warm things like the sweet corn on schedule in the spring. And of course, a deluge, I should mention, we have heavy clay soil here. Prince George's County has sandy soil. That's in the flood in the coastal plain. Heavy clay soil, it's not a good idea to work it in any way when it's wet because it'll form clods that will actually be persistent when the sun dries it out. So we try to stay off the soil when it's wet. So this 3 weeks of rain really, really set us back because it meant another few weeks after that before we get into the soil. Squash borers. We don't do anything about them. We lose a lot of squash in the spring. It's tragic to see a squash plant just one day give up and the leaves go down and it's over. A lot of growers will just keep planting. You can use row covers when the plant is small. And then when it gets big and starts to flower, you have to take the row cover off for pollination. But then you're going to lose them in a month anyhow to the vine borer, unless you have some clever chemical solution, and we're not into that. So the one thing you do, keep planting. Every month, plant another couple rows of squash, put row covers on until it blossoms, harvest squash for a month, cry as they die, but be happy that you got your next plot coming on. We transplanted that big squash planting that you saw. We put those out about maybe mid-July. I said end of July. We transplanted out. We started the plants inside. We put them out. We didn't do anything to protect them. That was the field that had some biochar in it. And the plants really produced well. And what killed that was 2 weeks of rain in September. Powdery mildew came in and absolutely killed that whole planting. And we tore it out one day. We pulled up the drip tape and we just said goodbye to all those squash. So these are frustrations. We're not, in California where you've got very little rain, you can drip irrigate everything and have a commercial production. We can't really do that. We got a flush of something and then, humidity and excess rainfall kill it or bugs kill it. And then we move on to the next crop. One of the reasons to have a diverse vegetable farm, so you've got something you can eat or grow or sell it.
Okay. Steve, I see you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think we need to probably make, if there's maybe one more question, then we need to take a short break and kind of head up.
Well,
I don't know.
We have had repeated questions about the sweet potato issue, so I thought I'd read this out.
All right.
Thoughts for Tom on merits of growing sweet potatoes. So at the Durwood Demo Garden, their main focus is to educate the public on growing all manner of things, but particularly vegetables. Sweet potatoes have seemed like a fine crop for educating. Easy to grow, leaves and sweet potatoes highly nutritious and delicious, and when grown well, the leaves cover the soil pretty quickly after planting. The ease of care for the growing plants mean they're achievable for both a volunteer staff demo garden and a busy home gardener. Big nutritional impact for low cost and easy tending. While growing them in vertical structures may be great to try in future years, that may add to the work of the home gardeners we try to educate. The soil is disturbed but not tilled. And then the beds are covered after harvesting. So the big question was, so what do the large potato farmers do with respect to soil disturbance? Any thoughts, Tom? I think we've lost him.
Did we lose?
Yep.
Okay. We did? Oh, here he is. He's coming back. So this will be the last question. We'll wrap things up. He may not have heard a lot, some of that.
I
too,
know,
so
I
maybe
know.
maybe just repeat that last bit for him if he, I think Tom's back. Hey, Tom, you back?
Maybe not.
Okay.
Here he is. Oh,
Hello, hello, hello.
hey, Tom.
Yeah,
Hi, Tom.
that was a very sudden departure. Sorry, my computer just went blank. I don't, maybe my charging cable is not working, but now I'm back in business. So glad to be here. In any case, maybe you were done with questions, Tina.
Pretty much done. The only question that came up was again about the sweet potatoes and what do large potato farmers do with respect to the soil disturbance that they create?
They do a massive disturbance of the soil. And the commercial growers are doing massive applications of fertilizer to make up for the fact that they've lost the, let's say, ecosystem services of soil biology. It's tragic. And, look, a potato grower in Maine is expected to produce, the norm is 40,000 pounds of potatoes per acre. And that requires a lot of supplemental fertility of a synthetic chemical nature. So that's synthetic nitrogen, various superphosphates, and it's hard on the soil. And what they do is a rotation. They'll grow potatoes in a field, and then they'll maybe grow a cover crop of rye for a year, or grow alfalfa for 3 years. You got to do something to get that soil back into shape before you then come and pound it again to really disturb it. A conventional grower has advised me, you've got to till your soil with a rotary tiller down to 8 inches deep to prepare this. Well, I won't do that. So we till much more shallowly, and then we make these beds for our potatoes, and then we hill it up. You have to hill potatoes also to get a decent crop, but I've never gotten even half of the commercial potato crop. I get maybe 15 to 20,000 pounds per acre, and they get 40,000 pounds per acre. But again, at the farmer's market, it's clear to everyone, my potatoes taste different from the commercial potatoes. And a woman came to my stand last year and bought potatoes. And the next week she came back and said, these are the potatoes I've been looking for the 30 years since I came to the United States. We had these potatoes in France, and now I've finally found the potatoes that fulfill, my hopes and expectations of what a potato really could and should be. So again, it's another, for me, there's this awful lot of anecdotal evidence that what we're growing is profoundly different from the produce you can get in the store. Potato growing requires soil disturbance unless I might be able to concoct something along the lines that Ben was talking about, where I make a composty bed that's built on top of the soil and put the potatoes in that. But the potatoes form not on the roots, but the potatoes form low on the stalk. They form above the seed. The roots form below the seed potato. The potatoes form above. So you want to gradually increase the amount of soil around the stalk above the seed potato as the potato is growing. And I think I might be able to do that with some clever system of mulching. A home garden has a lot of those options.
All right, I'm gonna jump in here, Tom and Tina. I think I need to give a little break here.
Thank you.
And so I know Michael said he's got, I think, a tight deadline. So we'll take a short break. We'll probably actually start right on time at 10, in about 7 minutes, guys, or 12:10. So, so we'll take, I'm sorry, a little shorter break than usual, but we'll be back here shortly. And I hope you join us here to hear Michael's presentation. Thank you, Tom. Awesome.
Thank you all. It's been a pleasure. Bye now.
Yeah. So Michael has spoken to us before in the past, I think maybe a couple times, and he's back again. So for those folks who may not know Michael and his background, I'm going to do a little read of his bio here. Michael Judd has worked with agroecological, whole system designs throughout the Americas for over 2 decades, focusing on applying permaculture and ecological design. His projects increase local food security and the community health in both tropical and temperate growing regions. He's the founder, I'm not going to quite say it, I know it's kind of a Spanish, ecologica, edible, and
Ecologia. Yep.
thank you. I just went on pronouncing it. I still couldn't remember it. Ecological Landscape Design, and Project Bonafide, an international nonprofit supporting agroecological research, and co-founder of Civiculture, a Maryland-based nonprofit which is helping to plant 1 million nut trees in the Mid-Atlantic region. He is also the author of Edible Landscaping with a Permaculture Twist and For the Love of Pawpaws. I think I'll stop there. There's more, but I think I'm going to let Michael get started.
Sure. Thanks, Stephen.
Sure.
Thanks to the whole team there for putting this together, inviting me and having me and hosting. Yeah, so you mentioned that I'm an author. I've written 2 books to date. My first one, Edible Landscaping with a Permaculture Twist, is a very how-to book based on work that I've actually done in the DC, area, Maryland area. And it's broken into bite-sized chapters. And one of the reasons I'm going into this is because there's a lot of the expanded notes on what I'm going to touch on today in this presentation in the book. You're welcome to take notes, but I've in some ways already done it for you in here. Lots of images, lots of steps to actually doing these projects yourself. So as you'll see, I'm very much orientated toward how to. Short on the philosophy, and like how do we start doing these things. So my books are in that same vein. And For Love of Pawpaws, I absolutely love pawpaws. We have a pawpaw festival. It's just, there's nothing like this fruit that grows in the north. And I'll touch on that more today. But also so much more is captured in this book. Again, full of images, and it's from seed to table, for whatever aspect you're interested in, it'll help guide you to having success growing these phenomenal fruits. So we live here in the Blue Ridge Mountains. We're in the watershed area of Frederick, just north of downtown Frederick. We live on about 25 acres of absolute heaven. It's mostly wooded, but about 3 acres is now filled with food forests, which are, fruits and nuts, useful plants. We grow mushrooms in the shade. Our house itself is fashioned from the woods around us. It's a straw bale circular home with a living roof. So with permaculture, our landscape and our home, all of our activities are designed together. They all sort of fit within the ecosystem that we're in. So, our building materials are from our place. They're what do really well in our climate. The house itself functions really well without a lot of extra inputs. It heats with a masonry stove, maybe an armful of wood a day in the winter to heat the house. It stays cool in the summer because of the thick walls, and the living roof keeps the heat out. So it's a design idea that doesn't need a lot of maintenance. And I take that same concept when I work on the landscape, when I'm working with what trees and what things to plant. I want to plant things that are going to thrive without my constant input. One of my sayings is design for neglect, because that's probably what's going to happen anyway. So when you're designing with things that thrive where you live, that can happen and things will still be, functioning and productive. It's an absolutely gorgeous house. Many of you have probably seen this. We do events throughout the year. We do mushroom workshops. We have our Pawpaw Fest. So there's different times where folks are allowed to come and see and explore the house, come inside the house even, and it's a treat. All right, so pawpaws. I got to kick off with pawpaws because it's just now ending pawpaw season, which is typically September in our region. And I grow cultivated pawpaws, which is quite a difference from what you might find wild. And the difference is that these pawpaws have been selected and crossbred so that they have a large size, sometimes upwards of 2 pounds. A medium large pawpaw from a cultivar or a select seedling is usually around a pound, the size of a mango. And inside, you have these large lima bean sized seeds, but you only have a few of them. And this is one of the select characteristics that you want when you're planting pawpaws, because in the wild, you might come across a pawpaw that is, maybe half a pound at most. And inside of that, it's probably going to be full of these big seeds and not a lot of flesh. And then of course, the quality of the flesh can be very different as well. In the wild, often it's quite bitter. But when you have a select cultivar, you're getting all of the tropical aromatic notes that pawpaw holds, and sweetness with no bitterness. So we call this the seed to pulp ratio, where you have a low seed to pulp ratio ideally. So you're getting more of that custard-like, very tasty flesh. And if you haven't had a pawpaw, you're in for a treat. It's got all of the tropical flavors of banana, mango, pineapple. Some say a little bit of maple syrup and honey in it, and they are exquisite. Now, it has a custard-like texture, which sometimes isn't for everybody, but if you like a custard, you're probably going to love pawpaws. And here's a good example of that difference. The top one being what you might find in the wild, the lower one, being a more cultivated pawpaw. And this is a pawpaw grown in full sun. So to get full fruit, you need full sun. Most folks are familiar with pawpaws growing as an understory, multi-stemmed, suckering shrub. And the pawpaw is a very adaptive species. We are talking about the only member of the custard apple family that migrated over millions of years into the north, into the cold. The only tropical, subtropical member that came all the way up to modern day southern Ontario. And it did this slowly on receding glaciers and the guts of giant mastodons and, from rivers flooding out, and it just migrated. So basically we have a tropical fruit that grows in the north and has big tropical leaves. You can see that it is. And then of course the fruit is, I lived in the tropics for 20 years of my life growing, food forests there and growing many of its cousins, like the custard apple and the guanabana and the sour sop. And, I can tell you the pawpaw is definitely one of the best fruits I've ever had anywhere in the world. So anyway, in the full shade, in the forest, you're typically not going to get fruit. And this is for a couple of reasons. One, because you don't have sun. You need sun to have fruit, period, across the board. And then you need two genetically different pawpaws. You need two pawpaws that grew from seeds, within reach of each other, ideally within 20 feet of each other for that cross-pollination to happen. And so a lot of times in the wild and in the deep shade, you only have one plant that just suckers itself out. You have one mother and all of her children coming up as suckers. And so there's no genetic diversity there to cross-pollinate with. But the pawpaw is adaptive. It realizes it doesn't need fruit. It'll just sucker itself. And these patches can get big. Up to 1/4 of an acre. So they really do know how to propagate themselves. When you bring them out into partial light, like you might see along the C&O Canal, they'll get tall and lanky. And if there's two genetically different ones growing nearby to cross-pollinate, you'll get some fruit. Now you bring it out into full sun and you give it the right conditions, and we'll talk about that, you're going to get full fruit. We're talking upwards of 50 pounds of fruit per tree. When you have good conditions and you have good genetics, these can be extremely productive. So productive, you got to figure out what to do. I've had to have a festival to get rid of all the fruit that we have. And then they're gorgeous. I call these edible landscape all-stars. I feel like you could put these in your front yard as just edible landscape specimens. They have a beautiful habit. In full sun, they'll do a pyramid shape, 15, maybe 20 feet if you don't prune them. Pruning them is easy, and I recommend that if you want to be able to reach your fruit. Because you do want to be able to ideally hand harvest your pawpaws, because once they fall, they bruise quickly. And so it's nice to be able to sort of hand harvest and have those fruits for upwards of a couple of weeks at least in your refrigerator. Otherwise, fruit off the ground, you got to eat it right away or process it. But gorgeous fall color, gorgeous yellows in this tree. And then the habit, the architecture of the tree is quite attractive as well in the winter. Here are a group of pawpaws, a pawpaw patch within our food forest. And you can see that I've got them at about 8 feet tall. So I keep cutting back that central leader, and sometimes I'll cut back my laterals a little bit as well. So that I basically have a 4 by 8, foot, pawpaw tree. And they love this. They love the vigorous return after pruning because it gives you new fruiting wood. This goes for a lot of your fruit trees. When you prune them hard, you'll get vigorous new growth, and that can create a lot more fruit buds for you. It creates more airflow, which is key for health and vibrancy. And then you'll get more sun on the leaves throughout, and that's going to also help you, get those high harvests. And they amazingly close themselves back up. If I cut back the central leader of a pawpaw, maybe if I cut off 3 or 4 feet on a tree, it will actually close that gap up within the same season. So I've been amazed with how responsive the pawpaw is. And in some ways, by pruning your trees like this, they are probably going to live longer. Now, an average for, a pawpaw that's not pruned, grown out in full sun, probably around 25 years is an average. These potentially, by pruning them and keeping them vigorous and healthy, could go beyond that. So it's not, it's a good thing to do for your trees. And then of course, if you want to see these beauties flying around, you need to either have pawpaws growing near you or you need to plant them, because the zebra swallowtail, its only host is the pawpaw. So when you see one of these majestical butterflies, there's pawpaws nearby. And then if you're not sold on pawpaws, pawpaw cheesecake. You can't beat it. It is absolutely delicious. Pawpaw typically is best in its raw state, to eat it fresh, to make ice cream with it, to make smoothies with it. They process very easily, and that's one of the saving graces to them being so perishable, is that you can pulp them and freeze that pulp easily for a year. And then you can pull that out and use it throughout the year in your smoothies. Just eat it, make ice cream, lassies, whatever. Or you can get creative, and you do need to be creative when you cook with pawpaw to capture that flavor. And I have a wonderful chapter in my book, For Love of Pawpaws, of all types of recipes that I worked with top chefs and everything from healthy and vegan to good old fashioned cheesecake, which sometimes you just don't want to mess with. So if you're interested in the foodie aspect, it's definitely covered real well in my book. The Pawpaw Fest, this was the first annual on this picture, but we just completed our 9th annual. We have our Pawpaw Fest, usually the 3rd Saturday in September, and it's here at our homestead. And it's a wonderful opportunity to come and try different pawpaw cultivars. We make pawpaw ice cream, it's pawpaw, everything, but then we have a wonderful lineup for workshops, walks, talks, plant propagation, food forest tours, learning these skills and seeing them in place. So a lot of what people really can get out of coming to the Pawpaw Fest is the experience of seeing and learning about how we're doing everything here. What does permaculture look like? So it's a great opportunity. Look for it. Ideally sign up for my newsletter, which lets you know when I'm doing these events, because they do typically sell out. The Pawpaw Fest always sells out, and then a lot of the events and the things that I do also sell out. So stay tuned to my newsletter, and it'll be an opportunity to come out and see. Even like when we do a mushroom workshop, which we have one coming up, we walk around the food forests, and we go inside the straw bale house, and we talk about it, and we enjoy different food forest jams and different flavors that we're growing here. So even though it's mushrooms, it's everything when you come here. So I encourage you to check that out. All right, the quintessential herb spiral. The herb spiral is pretty famous in permaculture because it's a neat little design that shows how you can be creative and stack functions, how you can do a lot in a little space. So these are fabulous. These can be, created anywhere on your landscape. If you have full sun, great, partial, or even if you have total shade, you can plant different things in this. It doesn't have to just be herbs. but wow, the herbs do love it because of all that stone, especially your Mediterranean herbs. Because a herb spiral like this, and I'll explain, I have two different types of herb spirals that I work with. This one I call the dry stack, and it's just that, it's dry stack stones all the way around, and then it's infilled with sort of a soil compost medium. So it's very fast draining, and there's not a lot of soil in there, so it's wonderful for drought tolerant herbs like rosemary and thyme and sage. And in this design, you can see here, you can also play a little bit with the direction, the aspect. So at the very top, it's sunny, and it's very potentially a little drier up there. So you really want to get your Mediterranean things like rosemary up there, maybe a little bit of oregano. And as you come down, facing, say, the east side, that's going to get protection from afternoon sun, you might put your parsley in there. And then you come around the back, and you've got that full sun again. You again come back to your Mediterranean herbs like sage. You can put lavender in there. You can put things in there that aren't necessarily culinary as well. And you come down to the very low spot that's facing north. Maybe you put some land cress in there. So it creates this footprint where you can play a little bit with the microclimates that it creates. But overall, all that stone does create a microclimate that helps overwinter things that might be on the edge. So for us, rosemary some years doesn't usually make it, but when it's in an herb spiral, it makes it. A lot of these things will overwinter well. But you can be creative. You could do strawberries in here. You could do something different with it. You could even set a little irrigation system up through the center of it when you build it. But here's a little diagram from my book, kind of covering what I was just sharing with you. And they can fit in different places in your landscape in different ways. Here, this is right along a fence line in a suburban yard where we carved out an area that we're going to make a food forest, right? So a food forest doesn't need to be that big. It can be any shape you want. And it's not growing food in the forest. It's growing food like the forest. So I'll talk about that in a minute, but usually we're doing it out in full sun. And the herb spiral here just creates a beautiful focal point for this overall design that was just sort of a shrubby fence line. So you can be creative with edible landscaping and permaculture, and it can look really good, actually excellent, because it's so unique and so creative. Here's another little twist on the spiral. This is more of almost like a Fibonacci spiral. This is in Baltimore. This was designed and built for a client that's very busy, that comes in and wants to be able to sort of grab their herbs as they're coming into the kitchen. And it's also outside the kitchen windows so that you're seeing it, you're being inspired, you're easily able to harvest. I think if you have the choice to put them, where you're walking, where your flow is on your landscape, it really is nice. And you can position them, orientate them to where they might aesthetically fit the best. Okay, now this is a different style. This is what I call a free-form herb spiral. And this one's actually 12 feet in diameter, and this was done as a centerpiece for a butterfly garden I was commissioned to do at a park here in Frederick County. And the difference here is that you're laying down your soil first, your soil compost mix. I'll usually do maybe like a 70% soils, 30% compost. And I'll get that dropped, ideally, right where I'm going to build these things. And then I go ahead and I shape the pile, and I compact where the stones are going to go. And then you start laying the stones against the earth pile. So it's a little bit easier in some ways than a dry stack. It allows you to use stone that may not be perfectly angular. You could do round stone on this. And then you have a lot more soil. So you've got a bigger base there for roots to grow, and you could grow a whole garden in one of these. Now, the one potential downside is that it's going to move a bit. It's going to get a little wonky, right? It's going to move on you. But I think that can also have character. That can also be something that has charm to it. But either the dry stack or the free form, I always try to start at 3 feet in height. If you start too much lower, you can sort of lose the architectural value of this, especially with the free form. And then here's another example of the free form. This one is in a very narrow back urban yard that only had one spot with sun. And the client said, I want a garden, but I've only got this one place of sun. And I was like, well, let's maximize it. Let's create a spiral, because you can get up to 9 times the growing space for the footprint of a spiral, right? Because you're going up. And we created this, and she was able to grow her tomatoes or zucchinis or herbs, everything in that space. And you can lay a stone in. I think after I took this picture, I probably laid a stone in for a walking stone in the middle of that bed, so you can reach into any other parts. So really, your herb spirals can be, any design, any size you want. I have done them even very small. I think the smallest diameter I've ever done is probably about 4 feet. And you can use small granite blocks for doing something like that, or even bricks these days. You can use bricks. What I encourage you to do is go to Google and go to images and put in herb spiral. And you will see so many different creative ideas and designs that everyone has come up with. And maybe that'll inspire you for your spot. And I had this picture sent to me recently after my first book was published, because the first chapter in my book, Edible Landscaping with a Permaculture Twist, is how to build these. And they said, loved your book, look what I built. And I thought this was wonderful, obviously gorgeous, but they put flowers in it, that's fine. You can rotate and do different things in these, they're more of these sort of garden spirals. So anyway, that one's gorgeous. Okay. So what we have here are 2 young pawpaws sitting on a swale. And between them, we have what's called a lead plant. This is a Morpha canadiensis. And it is from the Midwest, and it's a nitrogen-fixing shrub that the deer don't eat. Yes, the deer don't eat it. We have tons of deer here. We have a whole herd of deer on our property. I've actually never seen more deer anywhere than our property, and that's fine because we design for them. They don't eat pawpaws, and they don't eat the lead plant. There's quite a few things they won't eat. And the others, we design to get them out of their reach, and then they're fine. But for this case, I want to talk about the swale. The swale design is really key in helping to passively harvest water. So for healthy, vibrant soil, there's 2 main ingredients you must have, and that's consistent moisture, and that's organic matter, right? So by doing swales on contour, which is basically digging out a basin and putting that soil on the downhill side to create a berm. And it's on contour, which means it stays perfectly perpendicular to the slope. So as water comes down, it falls into that basin, and it stops and it sinks in, and it hydrates the water table 30, 40 feet down slope. It hydrates your whole zone for you every time it rains. I usually will fill those pathways, those basins in with wood chips, and that becomes a nice walking path next to your raised bed. Now that raised bed could be your garden bed, or it could be, where you're planting your fruit trees, your fruit bushes, your cane fruits. It's a great design, almost even your rose bushes, whatever you want to plant on there. And then of course, adding organic matter on top creates that cycle of moisture and organic matter. And here's an example of how beautiful they can look, because they move with the landscape. This is the backyard of what was Top Chef Brian Voltaggio's flagship restaurant, Volt, in Frederick, eons ago, at least a decade ago, commissioned me to do a woodland edible landscaping in the back near his kitchen, so that the chefs could come out and pick, these different flavors. So I did a rain garden to help capture the water coming in from offsite, and then having the rest of it captured in these swale designs. And there's that little teardrop shaped rain garden. So it's really about thinking on your landscape, how can you work with the water that's there? Sometimes people have too much water coming in, and that's a blessing once you know how to work with it. Oftentimes you want to move it from where you don't want it, but then you want to capture it. You want to spread it. You want to slow it down. You want to spread it. You want to sink it. You really ideally want to hold on to that, because that is your fertility. That is how your system will pump. And then here's another example of what you can do with a swale. You can plant tulips in it, whatever it is. You're stewarding the runoff. So in this case, the client wanted to steward the runoff from her roof. They wanted to make sure it wasn't rushing off too quickly into the watershed. So these swales help that. All those wood chips in there, they help break down and actually convert a lot of the chemical runoff into sugars. The fungi do it. So you're really just kind of imitating nature in a way that suits our aesthetics, that works with our landscapes and our modern challenges. So it's what we call stacking functions in permaculture. Another example, this is in Northern Virginia, where they did have a lot of water coming in, and we wanted to sort of spread that. So we kind of put these beds slightly off contour so that the water would meander and move through the landscape and hydrate the beds. What used to just kind of be a torrent that just tore through there is now feeding their gardens. And here's another example where on the left you can see inside the fence is kind of what you might typically see as a conventional garden. There's just sort of flat beds, maybe a few small raised beds that rely on maybe rain barrels, kind of what I call a high input garden. There's a lot of work needs to go into that. So I couldn't really get in that zone, so I did a swale above it because there's a lot of water coming just off site into this garden zone. So by putting the swale above it, we then were able to plant a windbreak on that with different types of fruit bushes, but then all that water stops and it sinks and then it hydrates for the garden beyond it. So you're doing this passive water irrigation. It really makes all the difference. Things thrive. And it takes away your need to be out there watering, which doesn't do the same thing as this groundwater does. Going out there and watering with your hose and stuff is not as efficient, and it doesn't help your systems thrive as well as really getting this water held in the root zone. When I say held, I don't mean like it's pooling in there, but it's actually moist in there. And water, when it's down deeper, it percolates up. That capillary action comes up through and helps feed the root systems, even during drought. So our systems, we just had a drought, right? This summer it was very, very dry, and almost everywhere around was down and brown, and our site here was lush, green, and productive. So it's not like you're just trying to keep things surviving. You can actually keep them productive in inclement weather, and that comes down to a number of factors in design. Windbreaks are key. If you don't have any kind of windbreaks are very important. They go hand in hand with moisture. Because if you're holding moisture, but you have wind, pulling all that moisture out and desiccating and stressing your plants, you want to do your design so that you have windbreaks. And sometimes you can stack the function of doing your swales and planting your windbreaks on them so that you're doing both at the same time. All right, mushrooms, fungi. We live in one of the best parts of the world for mushrooms. They just naturally thrive here in our humid climate, mid-Atlantic climate. So in permaculture, we observe what is doing well naturally without a lot of input. What's already thriving, so that when we interact with it, we have a lot of success. The pawpaw is a good example, right? The pawpaw, it's growing wild throughout our region. How about if we then find the best genetics and we create the conditions, and full sun for them, that they thrive and we get a ton of fruit for it, right? Easy. Mushrooms, they're growing everywhere. So, hey, how about we, do a little bit of work and grow shiitakes and oyster mushrooms? It doesn't take a lot. And then boom, the conditions are here for them. So we get a lot of response for not a lot of input. And a lot of people, fortunately, in this part of the world have a lot of shade because we have a lot of trees. And folks often say to me, I can't grow anything because I have shade. I'm like, no, you can grow mushrooms. And mushrooms themselves, the ones we eat, they're called fruiting bodies. So in a way, you are growing a fruit in the shade. You're utilizing that shade, and you're growing some of the best nutrient-dense food there is. But here's a warning. This is what can happen to you when you start growing mushrooms. It does get very exciting, and it's amazingly rewarding, the returns that you get. So a very quick outline of how it works. Again, well covered in my book. I also have done a mini course, online mini course for growing mushrooms. I think it's like 45 minutes. You can watch it and know what to do just by doing that. You can listen to it in the background. It will get you orientated and give you the resources to begin doing this, because growing mushrooms is very easy. And we have a mushroom workshop. We usually do one in the spring and one in the fall. And everyone who comes gets to do what I'm getting ready to share with you, basically drilling, inoculating a log, and they get to take that log home with them as well. So there's that physical benefit to coming to the workshop. So what you want to do is you want to find wood from healthy trees. It can't be something that has fallen during the summer, that's been diseased. You want healthy wood. Oh, sorry about that. And ideally, it's cut during the dormant season so that the wood is dormant. So we're actually now beginning the perfect time for starting to harvest wood for mushrooms all the way through, until late winter. And so you can get wood that's anywhere from 4 inches to 8 or even larger in diameter. The challenge with being larger is just maneuvering them. So the typical recommendation is between 4 and 8 inches in diameter by, approximately 3 feet in length. This is the wood you want. You want it to be healthy, and then you drill it. You're going to drill a pattern in it, and then you're going to put, spawn in it. You're going to drill all the way around this. And then the spawn are these little wooden dowels or sawdust that you insert, and they have the mycelium, they have the fungi, they have the type of mushroom on it that will go into the wood, and then it'll jump off and it'll go through the log, because this type of fungi eat woody material, lignin, cellulose. So they're going to run through your log. This is called the spawn run. Now it can take 6 to 12 months for this to happen, but once it successfully colonizes that log, it will start to fruit for you. Typically twice a year, when the temperature and the moisture is right, the logs will explode with mushrooms. And these mushrooms are delicious. These aren't like anything you can buy in the store. The ones in store are grown on sterilized sawdust blocks in warehouses. These are grown outdoors, and the cultivars that you're growing are super tasty. So it's a big experience to grow your own mushrooms just for the flavor of it. Now, depending on the size of the log and the type of the log, you can get these to live for anywhere from 3 to 8 years. And so you only inoculate once, put it in that sweet spot, and it will just fruit for you without doing anything else. It's amazingly easy, and it works very, very well in our climate. So I encourage you to learn more about growing your own mushrooms. You'd be surprised how easy it is. And you can find, tree companies nearby, that are cutting down whatever. They seem to be cutting down everything everywhere these days. You could get branch wood from an oak. That's wonderful for shiitakes. If someone's cutting a willow or tulip poplars or others that are great for oysters, you can find the charts and the information about what mushrooms grow well with what fungi in my course as well. So, and then yes, gorgeous, abundant, very, very tasty mushrooms will be yours. And the wine cap mushroom is what we call a terrestrial mushroom. It grows in organic matter, basically wood chips. And so these can be incorporated in and around the garden. Basically, what you want to do is create a wine cap patch. And this is typically done under a tree, a single tree. It could be your ornamental dogwood, your cherry tree, your apple tree. What you're doing here is you're creating a wonderful mulch system for your tree, which it's going to appreciate. But then you're layering in and sprinkling in the spawn, the mycelium of the wine cap mushroom. And that then, after only 6 months, can start to fruit profusely for you. So you can go out and start harvesting these delicious, very meaty, portobello-like mushrooms while you're feeding the system of your trees. Then you can take this and you can take a bucket of this sawdust, which is full of the mycelium, and during the summer, you can take it out in your garden and sprinkle it around your plants. And the zucchinis and the tomatoes have enough shade for this fungi to jump off into the organic matter, and it starts to help support the health of your plants. It actually gives them immune boost, right? And then when you go out and you're harvesting, for your dinner, you got your tomatoes, you got your zucchinis, and you got your mushrooms. So this is where it really becomes symbiotic, where you can put these plants and mushrooms together where they help support each other and augment your yields. Really, fungi are the keystone in healthy growing systems. I won't go into it further than that, other than to say, really check it out. Obviously I covered it in all my works, in both my books. I'm definitely talking about the importance of fungi and how to set the stage for them to thrive. I'll also throw out there a recommendation to watch Paul Stamets' TED Talk. It's an 18-minute talk that will change your life and your understanding of all the different ways that fungi play a role in our world and our existence. So All right, so a food forest. I've mentioned this before, that a food forest is not growing food in the forest, it's growing food like the forest. So when we look at a healthy forest ecosystem, we see a lot going on. We see overstory, mid-story trees, understory trees, bushes, shrubs, vines, ground covers, all really growing together and being super productive, at least productive in their photosynthesis and their biomass. So we take that and say, okay, well, when we come out on our landscape and we're going to plant a fruit tree, how do we create a little ecosystem for it instead of leaving it in the lawn, you know, at the whim of marauding weed whackers and lawnmowers? How can we sort of create a fungal rich environment, you know, which is basically large mulch? So a food forest doesn't need to be big either. It could be an 8-foot, you know, patch, and that's your food forest. You don't need a lot of space. But this 8-foot patch would be rich in organic matter, you know, in compost and wood chips, cardboard, manure, straw. And so you're creating the conditions for your tree to start with, but then you're going to plant companions with it, typically perennial plants that will support your fruit tree. These can be things like yarrow, which has a wonderful architecture, really good for beneficial insects and spiders to balance that insect ecology for you. Echinacea, you know, for pollinators, it's like a little gas station. They show up for your echinacea, and they come and help pollinate your fruit tree even better. You do things like comfrey as a ground cover, something that can mulch, that you can either chop and drop or that will pulse and feed the soil, you know, for you. So you want to make sure you're getting enough plants in there that they are then creating the organic matter for the future. You jumpstart it. You jumpstart your patch with all these things, you know, these organic waste streams that you're putting in there. You let that break down, then you start to plant it and you let that pulse. And you've created this little sort of food forest ecosystem. In permaculture, we call these guilds. And here's another example of a little diagram out of my first book, and nitrogen fixers as well. Plant your nitrogen fixing plants right up close into your fruit trees. I'll often plant them in the same hole because they're nurse plants. They're gonna, like that lead plant you saw earlier on those two young pawpaws. That lead plant was feeding the root zones of those pawpaws. And then I would come along and I would actually chop and drop at least half of that lead plant, and I would drop that organic rich mulch right there so it would feed the trees above and below. So it's a little bit of design, right? But your nitrogen fixers could be lupins, they could be the false blue indigo, they could be whatever aesthetically fits for you. Of course, I like the false, the indigo bush, the one I mentioned earlier. Also, lead plant is a cousin to that, and because the deer don't eat them, they're woody. I can really chop and drop them. But again, you choose the companions that work for you in your design, your aesthetic, and maybe things that you'll harvest. So here's another example. This is a little food forest patch in the early years of our food forest. You can see little pawpaw there on the right. That little pawpaw now is full sized and producing heavily. So this is a good decade ago. But this little patch is a great example. In the middle of this patch, I have a juneberry tree. And of course, deer like to eat juneberry leaves, anything in the apple family, they absolutely love. So I was like, okay, how can I get creative here with a patch? So I made this my deer patch in the sense that when the deer come up to the top right corner, those are Egyptian walking onions. It's a perennial onion that is absolutely gorgeous, super trippy to grow and wonderful to harvest, throughout the year. And the deer don't eat alliums. They don't eat the onion films. They come up to that and they're like, not interested. They come next to that coming down there at about 5 o'clock, and it's a spiky gooseberry. And they're like, ooh, they get poked and like, oh, this sucks. I'm moving on. They come down here at the bottom and it's a culinary sage. They're not eating culinary sages, any of these aromatic herbs, not interested. Next to that is wormwood. No, not interested. And they move on. They never saw that delicious little juneberry in the middle. Now, I'm not saying I wouldn't recommend fencing that juneberry. I would, but it's a design. It's a play, and I use all of these things. I will use and harvest all of these herbs, fruits, and the onions. I will be able to use all of those. So it's just an example, but I'm getting ground cover in there by putting all these plants in there. Now I have about 3 acres of of food forests. So I cannot maintain, these intimate little patches. So I've moved on to doing ground covers, running comfrey, running mints and things that I have to help cover those spaces that pulse the organic matter for me, sort of hold back the weeds and just kind of take care of things for me. But again, grower's choice. What suits you? How much space do you have? How much time do you have? And again, all covered well in my books. This is a wonderful resource that I've created. It's called the Fruit Patch. It is free app, currently only on Apple, iOS, working on doing some fundraising to be able to bring it to the web and to Android. So if anyone out there is interested in funding a really cool project, please let me know. But for now, we've created this fruit patch that helps you design just what I spoke about. Pick a Juneberry, pick a pawpaw, pick an American persimmon, pick a select mulberry, and then what do you want to plant with it? We have sort of the pollinator guild, or we have the culinary guild. And so it's a really cool tool. And we also mention our favorite cultivars of things and some of our favorite nurseries. So it's a wonderful resource. I encourage everyone to look at if you have the Apple phone. And if you do, please also leave it a review, because that helps. Juneberries. I bet many of you are familiar with Juneberries. They grow everywhere in our region. They're ornamental. Oftentimes you'll see them outside of, a strip mall or a McDonald's, and people don't even realize that this is one of the best tasting berries there are. Now there's different types of Juneberries. There's so many types that can make your head spin. But Canadiensis is the typical one for our region, though you can also grow the alnifolia. And beautiful shrubs. They do like airflow, so they do need to have good airflow for both the leaves, the trees, and the fruits. But when you get their conditions right, they are super productive. And the berries, to me, taste like cherry pie. They are just so sweet. They're like they have that cherry flavor, and they have little seeds in them that taste like almond. So it's cherry pie to me. I love them. Kids love them. We eat them by the handfuls, and then whatever I've left, I make Juneberry pie or soak them in vodka. Soak them in vodka for about a week, shake it, and then that makes one of the best cocktails you've ever had. All right. This is another example of being creative with a food forest, where you can do this. This is actually next to a pool. And it's like, okay, well, let's utilize this sunny spot, right? Sunny spot by a pool. Usually there's a lot of concrete. Figs love it, right? And of course, roses and other things. In the background there is a hardy kiwi arbor that's now absolutely covered with two hardy kiwis, full of fruit right now as well. I've been harvesting lots of hardy kiwis in recent days. Anyway, here's what I was mentioning earlier about the ground covers in a patch. So this is the running comfrey. Most people are familiar with standing comfrey. There's also running comfrey, which I absolutely love because it helps dominate the spaces that I need for having that, that fungal rich environment for the trees. So I'll jumpstart my patches, like I said, with different organic matters. And then after a season or so of breaking down, I'll come in and I'll plant my ground covers, and I'll have my trees grow out of that. And these ground covers maintain that fungal network. So here's a variation that works for, a front yard or somewhere where you need aesthetics. You can put down your sort of right on the grass. You can put down compost or manure. Then you want to put down newspaper and cardboard, because that will help kill that grass, and it'll bring up the worms. They love the cardboard and the newspapers. They'll come up and they'll tunnel your soil for you, and they'll leave their castings. Basically for what? For checking some organic matter on the ground and then giving it time. Time is the factor here that allows the soil to condition to the where you come back and you plant into it, things are going to thrive. But then obviously what I recommend is Mike's Deluxe sheet mulch, because this sets in place, 2 to 3 years or more of soil building in one go. So this I highly recommend. And this could be for whatever. This could be for your future pumpkin patch. It doesn't have to necessarily be, your fruit patch. Any area you think, oh, one day I think I'm going to do something back there, we'll start layering it now. Let it lay, and you come back and you'll be well rewarded for not having done much, but wait. So again, this is a combination of what I just mentioned, but the difference here is I put in a good 4 or more inches of wood chips in there. And the wood chips are going to help continue feeding that soil biota and the fungal life for you. And when you do a patch like this, it also becomes a sponge. So as water's moving down the landscape or onto it, it stops, it holds it, you know. It holds your water for you. It's another way of sort of passive irrigating. This is how I irrigate. You know, I irrigate by making these big patches that hold the water and the moisture in them. And then, of course, the ground covers or having lots of plants does the same thing. It holds the moisture, it shades the soil, it feeds the organic matter. And then you start to get this gorgeous mosaic happening that was once lawn. So a lot of people I hear saying, I'm tired of mowing my lawn, I don't want my lawn anymore. What do I do? Well, start patch by patch by patch. And then over time, you can expand those patches if you would like, you know, lay down more cardboard and newspaper and straw and wood chips and let them grow out until at some point you've created that dynamic food forest, but you've done it one patch at a time. You know, space them out. If you're doing pawpaws, say, hey, 12 feet apart. You know, if it's going to be your, you know, your small mid-sized fruit trees, 15 feet apart. Going to be your nut trees, let's go 40 feet apart. Mix them up, create your mid-over story, you know, as you design, but do it one patch at a time, and it makes the concept so much easier to approach, and ideally do it. And if you only have one patch, great, that's fine. Just do one patch. You'll be well rewarded. You'll learn a lot from the process and watching it, but you could also start getting rid of your lawn. So the fruit patch I mentioned earlier, it's part of a food forest transformation network where we're building an online network where whoever is planting, you know, these different trees can see how that connects to other people planting and how we can start to create, you know, an entire regional, you know, extended food forest in connection with each other that are doing it. So that's part of what we're doing some capital raise to design for. And you can visit all things that I've been speaking about and a whole lot more at my site, ecologiadesign.com. Highly recommend going there because it's very educational, it's very informative, very colorful, and you will see all kinds of things to learn from. And you'll see about our events, and you can sign up for our newsletter, which I recommend as well. Don't worry, I don't have time to spam anyone, so you know, you'll just really basically be hearing about our occasional events and doings. So that's my show. Thank you all very much.
All right. Hey,
Thank
Tim.
you. That was very informative, very interesting. There are a few questions that I'll pass on for you to answer. And starting with, let's see here. Well, first question is, where are you located?
I'm in. I mentioned that early on. I'm just north of downtown Frederick, Maryland, in the watershed.
Okay, very good. And of course, your website would give any further information, I guess. Herb spiral question, does that need protection in winter?
No, it's fine. Again, it kind of creates a microclimate. You know, if you have high exposure on your site, again, I recommend planting windbreaks. And a windbreak doesn't need to be a bunch of trees. It could be a line of, you know, fruit bushes. It could be something that just slows that wind down. So if you're getting strong winds on your garden, on anything that you're growing, I recommend starting to get some, you know, some buffer planted, because the stress from the wind will affect your productivity and your disease issues.
Okay, makes sense. Two swale questions. One, how do you dig when you do a swale?
You can do it by hand. You can do it with a mini excavator. You can do it with a bobcat. There's many different ways. I've done many by hand.
But how deep do you go?
Oh, how deep? It depends, but not very deep. You'd be surprised. I would say, and I have the diagrams in my book of the measurements, but basically about 8 inches deep for your basin, and you know, maybe 20 inches in width will create a corresponding berm that's about 9 inches tall by about 3 feet wide. So you don't want to actually build too big, because then you'll get too big a berm, and there's a balance there. So it really kind of depends on your condition. But if I'm talking about sort of the average backyard, you know, maybe you want to create one to capture the water coming down from your downspout. you'd be surprised that 8 inches is usually deep enough.
Hey, and let's see, looking at the pictures with them mounded up like that, do they erode? Do you have problems with them eroding?
No, I don't. I keep them covered with organic matter and plant matter. I never have exposed soil, unless I'm doing some very short-term seeding of something small. But no, surprisingly, that is not an issue.
Okay. Yeah, this has been fascinating. I've already looked up and getting ready to order at least one of your books.
Great.
Are pawpaws eaten by deer, squirrel, or other varmints?
Other deer, no. Squirrel, not so much, no. Raccoons and opossums.
Okay.
Opossums love them. But we've got a lot of wildlife around us, and they don't eat all the crop like they do with some other berries and stuff, because pawpaws are very rich. They're very high in protein and healthy fats. So even for a human, usually one pawpaw is enough. So the animals, don't just like eat all your fruit when it comes to pawpaws.
Okay. And I guess like an opossum, well, maybe they do climb trees, but imagine they're mostly getting them off the ground if they are getting them.
No, no, the opossums climb the trees.
Okay.
They climb the trees, and same with the raccoons. They'll get up in there.
Okay. Um, and a couple, just two kind of joint questions, I guess. And one, have you ever had to deal with Bermuda grass? And how are the weeds, and especially invasive ones, controlled in the food patch gardening?
So with anything that you want to transition from what it is to something else, you have to keep it from photosynthesizing. And I use the cardboard for that. Wood chips, doing that deep, heavy wood mulch helps kill what's below it. But then you want to establish what you want there for the long term. So a lot of these plants that are opportunistic are in full sun. They want the sun. That's where they grow. So you start to plant something that's going to create the shade. You get your fruit trees in there. You get some pawpaws in there. Mulberries are really heavy shade as well. You help them for a number of years get established, with your sheet mulching, and get them growing up. Then it's going to push out those sun-loving characters. So you need to transition. To expect to get rid of something in full sun by continually having it in full sun, you're just going to constantly be dealing with that. But this is a good way to condition your soil and transition it, and then plant in what you want.
That's helpful. Well, and I have two personal questions. One, I assume your pawpaw book makes recommendations on suitable cultivars for this area.
Absolutely. I mean, I have cultivar charts in there, based on different characteristics. But we are in the sweet spot. We're in the pawpaw belt. We can grow all the pawpaw cultivars in our region. So it's
That's
more a
good.
matter of like what kind of cultivar do you like. But I do get into all those details in my book.
Excellent. And I'm surprised I don't see pawpaws growing wild in the woods around here, or by the woods anyway.
They're everywhere. Once you start to really recognize the pawpaw, by its leaf, or sometimes by its flowers in the spring before it puts out leaves, you'll be amazed at how prevalent they are. So it's one of those things, once you start to learn about them, then you realize they're all around you. In our region, pawpaws are everywhere.
That's good to know. I have a new hobby, I think. Uh, my last question is, okay, I'm 73. Do I have time to grow a pawpaw tree?
Well, it depends on how long you're going to be around, I guess.
Okay,
Uh,
10
now,
years?
no, I mean, so if you're growing from seed a pawpaw, in full sun or partial sun, and it's happy, it can be 6 years to fruit. Now, if you're buying a grafted tree, it may only be 2 or 3 years from
Oh,
planting it
okay.
that you can get fruit. And if it's happy and healthy, they can actually start being quite productive at a young age as well.
Excellent. Okay. Well,
So I
thank
think
you.
I think I think I think you'd make it.
Okay, I appreciate it. Um, Thank you. This was a great presentation, and I look forward to learning more. Steve, over to you.
Dick, thank you very much. Let me get my camera back on. Here we go. Almost there. There we go. Hey, so I'm gonna wrap things up, guys. A few things. I need to thank our speakers, of course, Michael, who just presented, and Ben and Tom, who were here earlier. I also want to thank our tech team, Dick, Tina, and Chuck. Of course, Ryan. Special thanks goes out to Ryan. Did most of the work organizing, getting everything together here. One other thing I think people may want to know, if you are here for the whole fall festival, I mean fall festival, for the fall conference, excuse me, you get 4 hours of continuing education credit for today. And let's see, I think I'm missing anything else. I just want to mention a little side mention that at Montgomery College, I'm going to have I'm gonna see if I can share this over to you guys. Doing a little PR for Montgomery College. We're gonna have an introduction to cannabis class online. So kind of ties it. Maybe a little bit kind of the theme of today. I don't know, maybe not. But I put the link there. It is an online course. I've got a great instructor who teaches this to teach this class, Chad. He's taught this class a number of times in the state of Maryland for different community colleges. And he's very knowledgeable about the industry as a whole. So if you're ever thinking about maybe working or maybe growing a few cannabis plants yourself, that sort of thing, I think it'd be a great class to kind of get your feet wet, learn more about it. And we'll probably have some follow-up classes with this, and we'll probably have other classes kind of like this along those kind of lines what we were talking about today in the future. These are continuing ed classes, so it should be a little easier to register. You don't necessarily have to apply to Montgomery College. Basically, you can contact that number, reach out to that link. There's a phone number. I think when you pop up the link there, you can reach out to, they'll help you get registered. So with that, I think covered most things. I don't know if there's one thing in the chat. Oh, so thanks. So again, thank you, everyone. I'm going to let you guys head out. Thanks, Ryan, tech team, and everybody. We'll hope to see some of you in the future, hopefully live, face to face. Our next meeting next month will be at the Montgomery County Fairgrounds. And that will be for live face to face meeting. So our November meeting will be live at the Montgomery County Fairgrounds. Hope to see you guys there.